All right, we are live. Thank you for joining us today. Today we have a very interesting discussion. We're going to be looking at Gerald Gardner, the founder of the Wiccan religion, and we're going to be kind of comparing his origin or his background story to that of the Prophet of Islam, Muhammad. We're going to see that there are a number of similarities between them, some differences, of course. I mean, two people aren't going to be exactly the same. But it should be a very enlightening look at the Wiccan faith. And I think, and this is what I put in the video description, I think that what we're going to see is that when we look at any religion that's not Christianity, they have a lot in common. It seems
Yeah.
like perhaps the devil really only has one playbook that he goes to again and again. And well, I mean, who could blame him really, with Islam being so successful that he would try the same thing again and again in different areas where Islam is not prevalent. I'm joined today by Julian Gentry, a new guest to this channel, and we'll get to find out a little bit about himself here in a minute. But before we get into that, I'm going to open us with a word of prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for this time together. We thank you for the technology that allows us to connect with people all around the world, and we pray that the technology work well today. We ask that the stream reach people who need to hear it, and that everyone watching, whether they are Christian, Wiccan, Muslim, whatever, that they approach the material with an open mind, that they look at what we have to say, and they not simply take what we have to say for granted, or that they simply reject what we have to say, but that they think about it, they look into it, they verify things for themselves, and that they pursue the truth. We ask that you guide everyone to the truth, whatever that may be. If we are in error, please guide us to the truth. If we are speaking the truth, please help everyone else see the truth and be guided towards that. We ask that you be with us today on a personal level, that you give us the strength to get through this presentation, the perseverance, and more importantly, bless us with the love for the audience, that we not mock people or demean them, but that we show them the truth with love. We ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
All
All
right.
right.
Good
So,
prayer.
welcome to the channel, Julian. Why
Thank
don't
you
you
for
tell
having
us a
me.
little bit? Why don't you tell us a little bit about your background first? You know, where you grew up. Did you grow up in the church, or did you come to Christianity later in life?
Yeah, so I started out technically in a Methodist church, but I wouldn't have styled myself as a Methodist. Definitely been around Christianity my whole life, but I definitely didn't grow up as a Christian. I definitely wouldn't say that. My mom has been a Christian as long as I've known, and my dad's kind of struggled with it for a long time. But and I was just saying this thing this morning to someone else. If the father isn't spiritual, if he's not the leader, then the house behind him technically, or not technically, but usually doesn't follow. So without that kind of guidance, I was kind of just out in the ether. Um, Kind of fell away from what I even had known in middle school and in high school. I led a pretty hedonistic life that I'm not super proud of, but in college, through meeting my wife and through reading a bunch of books, seeing a bunch of sermons and all kinds of things, I eventually came to realize that what I had learned all those years ago as a kid actually was true. And the night that I became a Christian was just a really bad night for me, but I decided to listen to Amazing Grace and then prayed a prayer, and the rest was history everywhere. And I totally rejected it. I said, nope, I don't want that. I want to lead my own life. One funny thing is, my dad recommended that I read Mere Christianity because he just liked the book. I don't know if he really took it to heart, but he at least liked it. And I remember thinking to myself, I don't want to read that book because I think it'll make me a Christian. I definitely didn't want to follow that. But I read the book, and surprise, surprise, here I am. Um, of course, I read the Bible too, but yeah, no, I definitely rejected what was put in front of me. I only came around to it after I realized that it was true. I wouldn't be a Christian if I didn't think it was real and true. That's for sure.
Yeah, my story is similar. That I grew up in a church environment per se, but looking back, I definitely wouldn't call myself a Christian. It wasn't only
Mhm.
until I had that moment where I accepted Jesus as my personal savior, and that kind of
Right.
changed everything. I went from, being exposed to Christian material to
Mm.
actually wanting to seek it out and explore it. And after I made that commitment, I soon discovered that there was abundant evidence behind Christianity. All I had ever heard
Yeah.
is, like, uh, we're Christians and we believe this is true. No one ever gave me any evidence for it. Uh, and so I got very interested in apologetics, and I
Mhm.
spoke about apologetics for a long time, like in private conversations, right? With individuals,
Right.
never imagining that I would be a public speaker. And then I eventually ended up starting this YouTube channel through a series of events that my audience has heard before. But why did you end up starting a YouTube channel?
It was kind of much the same. I was really interested in apologetics because whenever someone was asked, "Why do you believe in Christianity?" and they said, "Because I have faith," or something like that, I didn't think that was good enough. I know that faith was important, but faith in something doesn't make it true. I could have faith that I'm going to survive when I jump off of a building, but that's just not going to happen. Um, yeah, so I was really interested in learning why it was true. I read a lot of books, watched a lot of sermons, a lot of videos on YouTube, and I was also really big into YouTube in all throughout high school. I watched it all the time. So it just kind of merged together. I didn't really take the, I suppose, pastoral track. I was really interested in apologetics from the start, and starting my YouTube channel was something that I didn't necessarily feel fully prepared for, but I knew that if I kept waiting for something like that to be fully prepared, then it was just never going to happen. I just needed to go and do it. So I started Veterans Day 2021. And I kind of wanted to make a podcast actually. So I knew that Joe Rogan's podcast had started with really humble beginnings, just him and a friend sitting in a room. I didn't really have any friends that wanted to sit with me in a room. So it was just me talking about stuff and blabbing. And those videos are still on my channel. But I just like talked for an hour, half an hour, whatever it was. And then I realized that nobody wants to hear me talk. Nobody wants to just watch me sit in a room and talk about things. So I switched to doing shorter form videos on specific topics, just things that I'm really interested in. It's kind of a eclectic mix of things.
Yeah, right there at the end, you kind of get into what you do on your channel a little bit, which was my next question. For those who are watching this, that they're going to be primarily Christians, a few Muslims, what would you say would be what of your content would appeal the most to them? What should they be on the lookout if they want to give your channel a try? In other words, what videos should they take a look at?
Well, this live stream is probably pretty cultural. What we're going to talk about is pretty cultural things, not necessarily philosophical things. Um, and a lot of what I do is cultural. So I talk about how Christianity works in the world, um, different cultural events that have something to do with Christianity, and other things that are born out of Christianity but kind of turn away from it, like, Wicca, for example. I haven't actually made a video myself on Wicca, but maybe I will in the future after this. The big thing that I'm working on right now is talking about critical race theory and related ideologies, but that video is still in the works. I haven't made that yet, but I'm just really interested in talking about things that really matter to people right now and tying them back to Christianity and showing the differences, the similarities between them, and why I believe Christianity to be true. So even though I like the classical apologetics and philosophy, and I'll do those things occasionally, I think most of it is cultural.
Excellent, and which is, highly relevant. The
Oh yeah,
arguments today against Christianity tend to be the classic intellectual arguments that classic apologetics raise. They tend to be these more subjective, moral type arguments against
right.
Christianity. It's no longer you shouldn't be a Christian because Christianity's false. It's you shouldn't be a Christian because Christianity is evil, or Christianity
Hmm.
is a problem for society. We would have a better society without religion. That kind of thing tends to be where most people are coming from today. So I think that's highly relevant area to be talking about. So we're going to be talking today about the Wiccan faith. This is a very international audience.
Hmm.
Those in the United States probably at least have some conception of what we're talking about. Perhaps in the UK, people might have a good idea, but much of the world probably doesn't really have any exposure to what we're going to be talking about today. So, can you start maybe with a little background about what the Wiccan faith is about?
Sure. So I actually got into learning about Wicca because my sister is involved in it, and she would probably be the stereotype or maybe archetype of someone who's interested in it. It seems to be definitely a Western thing, although there's a lot of Eastern occultism that's brought into it. But I think Wicca and the related things are definitely a Western invention. The guy that I'm going to talk about today, Gerald Gardner, he had an American mother and his father was British, but he was born in England and he spent a lot of time in Europe. So there's a lot of ancient European stuff brought in. It's very esoteric. There's values and ideas that are brought in from all different types of faiths and philosophies. I would think maybe if you're a college girl in America, you're more likely to be Wiccan than someone else. It's the same kind of thing that people would follow if they're into astrology or tarot cards or whatever. Or maybe they'll go down to Louisiana and learn some voodoo or something. Yeah, definitely a modern, maybe feminine type of religion. There's a big emphasis on priestesses in the religion, and actually also Gardnerian religion, Gardnerian Wicca, which I'm going to talk about, is a specific type. But you can also, if you're a Wiccan, just kind of do your own thing. You cast spells on your own. You're not necessarily part of a group that does it.
Excellent. There seemed to be this movement around the turn of the 20th century, perhaps starting around 1850, going
Mhm.
into the early 1900s, where lots of people were trying to create new religions, where lots of
Yeah.
people were seeking out something new. And I believe that Wiccan falls into that category, correct?
Hmm. Yes, it does. It's around the same time as Aleister Crowley with Thelema or Thelema, however you pronounce that, and Helena Blavatsky with Theosophy. Yeah, right around the same time. There's a lot of overlap between them.
And a couple quick comments from the audience here. Rose Petal, who is a Muslim who is regularly on this channel. I used to love studying Mother Nature until my
Yep.
Muslim boyfriend told me it's haram. But I'm interested today in the Wiccan. Hopefully, this is not a session about ripping Muhammad apart. So we'll have some references to Muhammad, but it's going to
Yeah.
primarily be about Gerald Gardner.
Hmm. Yeah, and Mother Nature kind of hits it right on the head. There's a lot of emphasis on the goddess of nature or whatever. Um, the priestess was actually kind of a later addition to Gardnerian Wicca, but whenever there's a priestess, she kind of invokes the spirit of Mother Nature. I think they call her the goddess.
Yeah, which actually raises an important question. We also hear a lot about New Age movements,
Hmm.
New Age religions, which on the surface may seem very similar, and people may think that Wiccan is an example of a New Age religion. So, can you kind of tell us how they're similar and how they're different from one another?
Well, you could classify it as a New Age religion, but it depends on the type of Wicca that you follow. Like I said, it's very esoteric, so it brings in aspects of a bunch of different religions and cults and philosophies. So you could absolutely make for yourself a version of Wicca that is very New Age. Um, and Gardner had a lot of overlap with the people who are the progenitors of the New Age religions, like Helena Blavatsky. So yeah, they share a lot of the same roots, but I wouldn't necessarily say that Wiccan is one New Age religion as a whole. You could do all kinds of stuff with it.
Excellent, excellent. Yeah, I'm not actually sure if, those who classify religions into categories would put Wiccan in the New Age, but it's definitely not synonymous, right? That there's definitely
No.
differences. The new people who call themselves New Age, they usually put a lot of emphasis on like spiritual guides, and that
Mm-hmm.
there's many, I don't really want to say deities, but like semi deities that you can call upon to help you,
Mm-hmm.
and which
Yeah, they're
is not, and it's not really about spells, right? In the New Age, whereas Wiccan can be more like classified as classic paganism reinvented.
right. Yep, exactly. Yeah, you'll see actually when I go through it how Gardner really reinvented the old witchcraft. Yeah, he definitely brought that stuff back into the fore.
And then one other comment here from Sola Scriptura: two religions only and two deities only. Either you're with Jehovah or you're with Satan. Would you agree with that statement?
I would. I'd say it's really obvious if you take the Aleister Crowley track of occultism. It's a little bit more nuanced with Gardner, which is why I think it's really popular. Thelema, in comparison, really isn't super popular because I think a lot of people can realize that there's a bunch of evil stuff in that. Like right on the face of it, it's really evil. I would say that Wicca is a bit more subversive, and it kind of goes under the radar. But yeah, definitely from the same root.
And then one more comment that just came in here from T Bishop: when I think Wiccan, I think crazy leftist chicks dancing naked around a fire. And that would definitely be kind of the stereotype.
Yeah,
Perhaps not like completely accurate, but
actually,
an element of truth.
you'd be surprised. You'll be surprised. Gardner himself was a nudist, and if I'll read a little bit of his Book of Shadows, but you can actually find the whole text online, and there's a lot about being what they call sky clad, which is, I guess, clothed in the sky, which means you don't have any actual clothes on. So yeah, there's a lot of nudity in there.
All right.
Maybe not dancing around a
So,
fire, maybe dancing around something else. I don't know, but yeah.
so with that introduction out of the way, you want to dive into telling us about Gerald Gardner and the founding of Wicca.
Sure. I have to start with a bit of a background before Gardner, though. I'll get into his biography in a second, but it started a long time before him. So you were right in saying that a lot of it started in the maybe after 1850 into the turn of the century, but the history of it goes, well, you could say that it goes way back past the first century if you like. There's all kinds of occult stuff near and around the time of ancient Israel. But this starts in the 16th and 17th centuries with the witch trials. If you think Salem, you're pretty much on the right track there. So there was a big moral panic in Europe and America, lots of things going wrong, and they needed a scapegoat. So there was crop failures, war, disease, all kinds of things. And men and women, it wasn't just women, men and women were blamed for witchcraft. Maybe they cast some kind of curse upon a field and that's why the crops didn't grow. There was a lot of superstitiousness in that time, and they just thought, well, maybe it's these people. It makes it really clear. We can get rid of those people and maybe our crops will grow again, or maybe we won't have this disease again. So yeah, definitely I'd say it was kind of born out of desperation, and it didn't seem like the people who were confessing to be witches were actually witches. They were confessing because they were under duress. They were accused of worshiping the devil, so there's your tie to Satan, practicing cannibalism, and generally being malevolent. It wasn't, hey, you made these curses or you made these spells and that actually helped someone else. They were always being blamed for doing evil things. And it seems likely that the trials were forged. I don't know about the evidence for this, but I've heard that a lot of the Salem witch trials were influenced by what ended up being psychedelics in the drinking water. So that would definitely fuel a lot of very scrupulous and superstitious people to go and have a crusade against the witches or something. So that's where the persecution of witches, I'll say witches like this because who knows if they were actually witches. It seems like they were just confessing because they were under duress. So that's where it started in the 16th and 17th centuries. But it wasn't like a giant movement. There was a bunch of hysteria around it, but it wasn't anything organized. And then this was actually before 1850, but we jump a bit ahead to around 1828. That's what my note says. So there was a guy named Carl Ernst Yark. I'm definitely going to pronounce that wrong. I don't know where that's from. Jarcke. Good luck with that. He had like an alternative explanation for those witch trials. And it wasn't that these people were under duress and they were falsely accused of being witches, but that they were actually witches and that there was a pre-Christian pagan witch cult that had been suppressed for a long period of time. And that 16th and 17th century persecution was an example of them being suppressed specifically by the Christian church. Like it was forced to go underground, and then it resurfaced at the time of the witch trials, which is why we have all those records of witches being persecuted. So it wasn't really taken seriously as an explanation for it by Yark's contemporaries, but then it was picked up later, right around the turn of the century and into the 1920s and 30s. So there's a woman named Margaret Murray, or Murray. She was an Egyptologist. As a side note, there seems to be a correlation between being an Egyptologist and being a cult, and I don't really know why. There's a guy, I'm gonna do some video on him in the future. His name is can't remember, Billy something, but his channel is called Forbidden Knowledge, like forbidden knowledge, and it's all about all of this knowledge that was lost from Egypt, and the Christians have been hiding it for all this time, and now we have the true history, or the true knowledge, or the true way to God, or whatever. So he's an Egyptologist. So I don't know. There seems to be some kind of correlation between Egyptology and occultism. Surprise, surprise. But anyway, she wrote The Witch Cult in Western Europe in 1921 and The God of the Witches in 1933. And she kind of had an intellectual approach to witchcraft. And she brought in a lot of naturalistic things. So I don't know if this would be the origin of the Mother Nature kind of thing in paganism, but it was definitely influenced by her a lot. So she brought in a lot of practices of pagan nature worship, which were a lot older than the witch trials that had been happening in previous centuries. I see that comment. I wasn't into Wicca, if you're asking about me. Currently, my sister's into Wicca, which is why I'm interested in it. So there you go. Yeah, so let's see. Oh, if you've ever heard about paganism including a horned god named Janus or Janus, this seems to be the inclusion of that from Margaret Murray. She brought that in as well with the naturalistic pagan nature worship kind of things. And, she wasn't really even taken that seriously. Surprise, surprise. In her day, this was in the 1920s, 1930s. There was a lot of similar things going on. And, I don't think any of them were really taken all that seriously, whether you're talking about Aleister Crowley or Helena Blavatsky. They weren't taken seriously until a lot later. This would definitely be one of those that wasn't really taken seriously at the time. But she claimed that magic was good magic. The magic of these witch cults from time immemorial was good magic, not malevolent magic, and that they were falsely accused of malevolent or maybe black magic back in the 16th and 17th centuries. So you'll hear a lot today, actually, of witches doing what they call white magic or maybe good magic or some other name. They say that Magic is just one of those things that God gives us, and we can use it in a good or bad way. So I choose to use it in a good way and do white magic. Again, I don't know if this is the genesis of that in paganism, but it was at least brought in to paganism by Margaret Murray. So I have a little list here of a summary of her version of witchcraft. And if you know anything about Wicca or paganism nowadays, see if there's a lot of overlap between what you know and this list. So there was a single god, Janus, the horned god. She created the idea of covens, I believe, and she specifically said that covens have 13 members and that they meet 4 times a year. There's a figure in the rituals called the Maiden. I don't think it was a goddess like Janus. So Janus was the single deity, so it kind of is monotheism. But there's also a figure called the Maiden, which is present in the rituals. And I think both of those are being channeled via certain people in the ritual. It was contrary to common belief, it's actually a patriarchal religion. So that guy that said that he thinks of a bunch of leftist chicks dancing around a fire naked, you're technically right, because that's what a lot of people think nowadays, but it's actually a patriarchal religion, which I assume a leftist chick would not really like very much. The single god Janus was to be channeled through a male priest. The idea of priestesses wasn't brought in until a lot later, actually towards the end of Gerald Gardner's life. And I think that was in the 50s. So this is 1920s, 1930s. It was definitely very patriarchal. Like I said earlier, it was also naturalistic. So lots of nature worship brought in, love of trees. I wonder if there's a lot of Wiccan paganism at Woodstock and in the 60s with all the tree hugging hippies. Maybe that's where they got that from. And then there was an emphasis on sexuality in the practices. So if you're thinking of a bunch of people dancing naked around a fire, then maybe that's where you get that from. From what I could tell, it seemed to be that the pleasures of life, specifically sexual pleasure, was a way to kind of unlock the mind to a higher reality. That's at least what it seemed based on the research that I did. And then again, I have here that she claimed it was benevolent magic. It was meant for good. It was meant for bringing people together and for reaching a higher reality, a higher knowledge, figuring out who God is, that kind of thing. Which, though seemingly well-intentioned, I think is definitely wrong. Okay.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you for that background. To summarize, we have an environment where there probably aren't many, if any, people practicing well, what we would call witchcraft. There was, however, paranoia about people practicing
Yes.
witchcraft, and there was a lot of attempts in the church, but really as from governments, right? It's not really coming from the church per se, although since everyone is a Christian, it was coming from Christians.
Right.
That to seek these out and get rid of these people because bad things were happening and they wanted an explanation for it. And then as that background is starting to fade, people are starting to not necessarily move away from Christianity yet, but they're at least more open to something new, right? They're more open to something new, and all these movements are starting to pop up where people are claiming to be the new prophet, or they're claiming to start a new religion, and most of these fade out pretty quickly. But it's in that kind of environment that Wicca is born. Is that correct?
Yeah, I would say so. Wicca, at least in the Gardnerian form, was born around that time, yeah.
Excellent. So if you want to now tell us a little bit about Gardner and his background.
Sure, but before that, I have one more piece of the history before him.
Sure thing.
So, like I said, the same with Yark. Margaret Murray wasn't really taken very seriously, except by the people who were directly around her, of course. I don't know if she had a cult around her. You could talk all day about the definition of a cult, and we could have a whole nother stream on that kind of thing. So I don't know if it was a cult, but at least the people around her that were associated with her seemed to believe in the same kind of thing that she believed in. But she wasn't taken seriously by the general public, and specifically historians and folklorists. Those are the people who know the most about the history and folklore, obviously, by their names. That was redundant. But they didn't take her very seriously as an Egyptologist, and they didn't take her work very seriously. So her work wasn't accepted, and her naturalistic hypothesis of the witch cult was not taken very seriously. Or actually, it was just outright denied by historians. It seemed that in her view of the witch trials, because she had done an analysis of the witch trials to figure out why they had happened, she was really selective of the information that she was taking from those to kind of support her worldview. So she'd cut out the bad things and take the things that were supportive of her naturalistic white magic kind of hypothesis. But even
Before you
still,
move on,
yeah, sure.
yeah, this comment from Love is My Religion. The misguided Christian did practice witchcraft by murdering 50,000 witches or so. Please correct me if I am wrong. Well, first of all, you're wrong. Your figure is way off. It's probably like a few hundred people who were ever put to death for practicing or allegedly practicing witchcraft. Second, I don't see how that would be practicing witchcraft. When someone, whatever you think about the death penalty for murder, when you put someone to death for murdering someone, that doesn't mean you're committing murder. If you put someone to death for raping someone, that doesn't mean you're
Mhm.
committing rape. So I'm not quite following the logic here.
By misguided Christian, does that mean the 16th and 17th century witch trials, like in Salem, for example? I'm guessing that's what that means.
I would assume so, yes.
Yeah, practicing witchcraft. I'll get a bit into it later, but I think by the general definitions, you'd have an emphasis on rituals and spells and communing with a higher god. I don't think you need to do any of those things to condemn someone for murder, even if you're wrong about the murder. They would just use their version of the justice system to go and do that. So I don't think there's a connection to witchcraft there, even if the Christians were misguided. Yeah.
Yeah, and to be clear, you know, if Christians put people to death for practicing witchcraft, they were in error, and we can say that plainly.
Right.
Uh, we don't need to say that Christianity is false because some Christians did something wrong. We, as Christians, we believe that all people are sinners and we make mistakes. And there was a time period where Christians were actively seeking out to find witches and put them to death in some cases. Usually the sentence was much less, and usually the people who were accused repented and got no sentence at all, perhaps because they were never really witches to begin with. But regardless of whether they were witches, they repented, and yeah, they spent some time waiting trial and whatnot, but there was no lasting penalty. So your understanding of history is mistaken. There definitely were not 50,000 people put to death for being witches. That is a sensational number with no basis in history. But
Hmm.
even if that number was true, it still wouldn't be all that relevant because we would just say, yes, the Christians made mistakes. They
Yeah.
did something wrong.
The number of people, let's say, for example, that all of those people were put to death wrongly and that it was 50,000. The number of people put to death wrongly by Christians has no bearing on the truth of Christianity. The truth of Christianity lies specifically in the death and resurrection of Christ. And there's no connection between that and a bunch of people being wrongly killed for being witches. Those are two entirely different things. And also, the example of the Spanish Inquisition comes to mind because a lot of people will say that maybe the Crusades or the Spanish Inquisition was an example of Christianity being evil. And I think this goes back to what you were saying earlier about people saying no longer having intellectual arguments against Christianity, but saying that Christianity is evil. To that, I would say Christians still are capable of doing evil. We don't suddenly become perfect once we accept Christ. And, you know, a bunch of people in the Spanish Inquisition going and rounding up Jewish people and trying to forcefully convert them to Christianity is absolutely abhorrent. Like that, there's no teaching in Christianity that tells people to go and do that kind of thing. You can't force conversion. This is kind of a related verse, but 2 Corinthians 9:7 says that each must give as he has decided in his heart, because God loves a cheerful giver. I know that it's talking about giving, but it's kind of along the lines of God loving people making willing decisions, not being forced or coerced into doing something, not doing something reluctantly. So any kind of forced conversion to Christianity is definitely a wrong kind of thing.
So, sorry, this is off topic, but I need to address this. So, Mahmoud Anaz Khan, here we go again with Christians persecuting Muslims. I got timed out for no reason. I did not even spam. There's no freedom of speech in Dawa channels. We never do this. Well, first of all, your last statement's blatantly false. Dawa channels block Christians all the time. They don't even time them out. They just block them on the first time they try to criticize Islam. Second of all, you were timed out for being off topic. The topic today is not your delusions about Christians persecuting you. The topic today is Wicca. If you want to have a conversation with me, I will put my email in the chat. You can email me and we can discuss whatever topic you want. But today's stream is not about you and it's not about Islam. So get on topic or come back a different day when you're on topic. But I don't tolerate people spamming. And yes, it is spamming when you keep sending the same thing over and over again about how you're persecuted. And you just did the same thing again, Mr. I'm not spamming. Just put out yet another message about how he's supposedly persecuted because someone timed him out. Mahmoud, that is not persecution. You know what persecution is? When Muslims go into Christian lands and force them to convert to Islam or pay the jizya. And guess what? That's a mercy compared to what you do to non-Christians and non-Jews, people who are not people of the book. When Muslims invaded India, the only choices the Hindus had was conversion or death. And Muslim sources talk proudly about how they massacred so many Hindus that they were walking over their dead bodies to get into their temples to desecrate their temples. So if you want to talk about persecution, we can talk about the history of Islam, but someone timing you out on my channel for being off topic is not persecution. That'll be the last off topic thing we talk about today.
Ali Dawa comes to mind, and we're proud of that.
Exactly. So getting back to the subject at hand.
Yeah, sure.
So I think that you've... Go ahead.
Well, do you have a question real quick?
I was just going to say, I think that you've pretty much laid out the background, unless there's anything else you want to...
there's just one small detail, one more small thing, yeah.
Sure.
So I was talking about Margaret Murray. She had selectively chosen information from the witch trials to support her view. However, and a lot of people said, a lot of historians and folklorists said, no, that's not right. However, for whatever reason, she was chosen to write the chapter on witchcraft in the Encyclopedia Britannica, which was ubiquitous. Like this, it was, we might not use it nowadays, but the Encyclopedia Britannica was very authoritative back in the day. And for whatever reason, she was the person chosen to write the section on witchcraft. And instead of writing a historical account about it, she just did the same thing that she did before and write about her experiences and why she believed why she believed witchcraft to be true. So there was just proselytizing for witchcraft in Encyclopedia Britannica, which was spread around. So a lot of people got a taste of witchcraft just through that. That made it so that witchcraft, at least as she determined it, was the foremost version of witchcraft. The definition that she used, I suppose, was the foremost definition. And that definitely influenced people like Gerald Gardner, who now we'll get to. He was actually a folklorist, and he took her seriously. So he was one of the people. It wasn't one of the people who condemned her practices, he believed that she was correct. Oh, and one last little detail. That version of the Encyclopedia Britannica was written in 1929, and it was published for 40 years after that. 40 years of witchcraft being promoted by Encyclopedia Britannica, as Margaret Murray has determined what it means.
Wow.
Kind of crazy. Yeah, that's a long time. That's almost, 2 generations worth of people being subjected to witchcraft. All right, so
Indeed. So, yeah, with that background in mind, now we come to Gerald Gardner.
yeah. So I'll give the history of Gardnerian Wicca in a second, but first, just a little biography on him. So he was born in 1884 in England, in Lancashire, England. I never get those pronunciations right. It looks like Lancashire, but it's like Lancashire. I don't know. England's kind of weird. He was born to a wealthy family. Like I said earlier, his mother was American and his father was British. They had a hardwood business and very wealthy. But Gardner, that is, was afflicted by asthma. And he was afflicted by asthma all his life. I think it might have been asthma that ended up killing him. But especially as a child, he was affected by it. And he had a nurse who was taking care of him. Her name was Josephine McCombie, and he called her Com. And his own parents didn't really spend all that much time in his life. But Com became like a motherly figure to him. So she spent more time with him than his own parents did. And she suggested that they travel out of the cold England to the southern Mediterranean region to potentially cure his asthma, or at least help with it. And they said yes. So they didn't just spend a summer in the Mediterranean. They spent years and years and years there. And they traveled all around. It wasn't just the Mediterranean. He spent a lot of his early years in Madeira, which is in Portugal. Ceylon, I'm not sure that's how you pronounce it, but Ceylon, which is modern day Sri Lanka, and then Malaya, which is modern day Singapore. And Madeira was part of Portugal, which is very Christian, very Catholic. And then Sri Lanka and Singapore are very Buddhist. So you can already see that there's an esoteric mix of things coming into Gerald Gardner's life. At some point in his travels, he also developed a affinity for weapons, and that doesn't really come into Wicca much more than like ceremonial knives. But yeah, that's just another thing that he started to enjoy in that time. And also, Com spent most of her time being very flirtatious and kind of using those trips as manhunts. She was looking for a suitor, and she kind of thought that Gerald Gardner was a bit of a nuisance as a child. So she kind of let him go and do his own thing. He was left to his own devices. But I was thinking that might have something to do with his proclivities, his sexual proclivities, because the only motherly figure that he had that he was traveling around with was very flirtatious and spent a lot of her time just looking for suitors. So I don't know. I don't have a ton of evidence for that, but I think that there might be some kind of connection there. So one last thing for his early life, he had stayed with some family friends, or I think they were extended family. And through them, he learned of rumors of his grandfather Joseph, who was apparently a witch, and someone in his lineage who had been persecuted for witchcraft all the way back in 1610. So he was already thinking about witchcraft at that point, even before he got to be a folklorist and learn about Margaret Murray. This was his early childhood, and apparently there was some kind of link to witchcraft in his background, but that kind of laid dormant until later in his life. He actually doesn't get into witchcraft until he's, well, I don't want to say really old, because then my parents will think that they're really, really old. But he was in his 50s, I think, when he really got into it. Yeah, born in 1884. He got into it in 1936. So in 1936, he returned to England from his travels. And surprise, surprise, the climate made him sick. It seemed that spending all that time in the southern climates actually did help his asthma. But he was back in England. He wasn't living with Calm anymore, and he was an older man by this point. Actually, let's see. He was in his 50s. He's early 50s at this point. Yeah. So definitely on his own by that point. And there's a lot that I'm skipping over there. A lot that's not really relevant to Wicca. Just different experiences that he had. Lots of people he met. Yeah. But that's not really relevant to Wicca. So he had a good life at that point, or a good mix of things going on in his life at that point. And then now is when he switches into Wicca. So he was very sick, and he went to his doctor, and his doctor suggested for his asthma to cure it that he might be a nudist. I don't know, man.
How does that work?
Maybe that's some kind of lost art. Is that part of the Hippocratic Oath? You have to make sure that people get nude at some point, maybe? I don't know. But yeah, that was the supposed cure for his asthma. So he tentatively ventured into that, but then he learned to like it over time. And he met a bunch of people at nudist colonies that ended up being very influential in his life. And he was very influential in their lives. And a lot of writings came out of that. After he retired, also in 1936, he traveled to Cyprus, which is still known as Cyprus nowadays. It's not some other name. He went to Cyprus and wrote a book called A Goddess Arrives, which is a fiction story, but it's kind of a self-insert. So if you've seen there's a lot of modern movies and TV where the main character will be a self-insert of the writer. The new Velma show comes to mind by Mindy Kaling. Like, the main character looks like Mindy Kaling. So in A Goddess Arrives, the character, while not necessarily looking like Gardner, it was kind of a self-insert of himself into the story. And the character has kind of a flashback to his previous life. So here you'll see an influence by Eastern religions because he's bringing in reincarnation he's thinking a lot about reincarnation, enough to write a book about it. And this character had a flashback to his previous life where he was a goddess in Cyprus, or a queen goddess in Cyprus. And she practiced a lot of sorcery. So you can see he's thinking a lot about reincarnation. That ends up being kind of a central tenet of, A Goddess Arrives. I see that comment. Yep. Reincarnation ends up being very central to Wiccan religion. He writes about it in his Book of Shadows later. But then he's also thinking a lot about sorcery and magic and witchcraft. So a couple of years pass, 1938. He and his wife settled down in a place called New Forest in England. And this is where the Rosicrucians come in. I'm not very familiar with the Rosicrucians, but I know that they are a Christian occultist group. And I don't know if I said it earlier, but a lot of the overlap between Wicca and Islam has to do with a misunderstanding of Christianity. So I would say there's a lot of misunderstanding of Christianity in Rosicrucianism, and he was steeped in Rosicrucianism. He joined a group of Rosicrucians in 1938. So definitely a lot of misunderstandings about Christianity there. It was called the Rosicrucian Order Crotona Fellowship. And it wasn't just Rosicrucianism. All of this stuff is very esoteric. It kind of flows in and out. There's a whole bunch of overlap between all of these different ideas. So it was a Rosicrucian group, but it had theosophy, so think Helena Blavatsky, and Freemasonry. And actually, Gardner was a Freemason for a little bit of time, but he then, I don't remember if he left because he didn't pay his dues or because he didn't agree with them. I'm not really sure, but he at least was a Freemason for a little bit of time. So put on your tinfoil hats and get to making conspiracy theories there. Maybe he was part of the Illuminati or something. I don't know. But this group that he was in, he became disenchanted with them. There was a subgroup within this group that he became friends with, but with the group at large, he became kind of disenchanted with them because they had some wild claims. And these made me chuckle. So the leader of the group apparently was immortal, but it was immortal in that he was reincarnated into different people, or something like that. It was really strange, but he claimed to be immortal. And if you know anything about the story it's not from the Bible, it's related to the Bible. It's a story called The Wandering Jew, about a man who's apparently cursed to walk the earth all the days until the return of Christ. And Gardner jokingly asked if that guy was the Wandering Jew, and apparently that guy got very angry about that. Another one of the things that he was disenchanted with was the claim that a certain lamp in the building that they met was actually the Holy Grail. And in 1939, get this, the group prophesied that war in Germany would not come to Britain. And the very next day, Britain declared war in Germany. So at that point, he was like, okay, I'm out. These people are not followers of the real truth. Clearly, they're wrong. They just made a false prophecy. And, good for him. He had some kind of discernment, but he went from one bad thing to another. So he was initiated into the New Forest Coven in New Forest, England in 1939, the next year. These were members of that Rosicrucian cult who were kind of a subgroup, and they were belittled by the other ones. Instead of living off of some subsidy, these people had actual jobs, and it didn't seem like they had some kind of nominal surface interest in Rosicrucianism and the occult. They were real occultists. They really believed that kind of stuff. They really wanted to do the rituals, all that good stuff, or bad stuff. And they became fast friends because Gardner was really interested in that. So at some point, he went to the house of one of the members, and he was asked to strip naked, which he had no problem with because he was a nudist. And he did the ritual with them, and they were speaking in an old language. I think it was Celtic. And at some point, the word wicca, W-I-C-C-E, wicca, was spoken like halfway through the ritual. And he heard that, and he realized, because at this point, he had known about Margaret Murray and her hypothesis of the witch cult. So at this point, he remembers all of a sudden, wait a second, wicca sounds like the word witch. And there's also witches apparently in his lineage, and he knows about the witch trials. So he thinks, no way. This is the same witch cult Margaret Murray was talking about, and it's been alive this whole time. I thought it died out, but no, here it is. So he thinks this is part of the witch cult of Margaret Murray's time. And that just takes over his whole life. At this point, he's an older man. He's retired. He doesn't have to worry about his job. He's still married. He's with his wife. He's married to his wife until her death much later. But I don't think he ever had children. So he had a lot of time to burn on this kind of stuff, and this definitely took over his whole life. So after that, in 1945, he moved to London. Bad idea. And he bought a plot of land out there, which was a nudist colony. So his proclivity for being a nudist kept going in London. But he bought that nudist colony, and he spent a lot of time recruiting members into the nudist colony. So again, he's bringing a whole bunch of stuff together under one umbrella. Now he's a nudist. Now he's doing Rosicrucian occult rituals. Now he's, believing that the witch cult from Margaret Murray is alive and well. So all these things are being brought together. And
So
there was
clarification from Marlene here. Am I understanding that there are already covens, even though he's credited with being the founder of Wicca?
Yeah, I think the word that's doing all the work in that sentence is credited. That's right. So the idea was that there were already covens. Even Margaret Murray was talking about covens back in her day. And this really wasn't that much before Gardner. Like I said, Margaret Murray was just after the turn of the century, and Gardner's doing this in the 30s. So he's really right after her. But yeah, there's definitely proof that there were covens before his time. He's credited with being the founder of Wicca, which you could call a different thing than witchcraft. And again, it depends on your definition. This is very esoteric. There's lots of different definitions. My sister, for example, she probably wouldn't call herself a Gardnerian Wiccan. She would just say she does her own little thing. But he founded the sect of Wicca which is the most, I think it's still the most popular, at least was the most popular for a long time until people started branching out. And people actually started branching out because he encouraged them to do so. Later, I'll talk about his Book of Shadows. The Book of Shadows is like their version of the Bible, and he told people to keep their own notes and to do their own rituals and spells. The Book of Shadows was just the ones that worked for him. So he encouraged people to kind of branch off and do their own thing. But he was like the main conduit for all the stuff. So yeah, that's where that comes from. I think,
That
yeah,
clarification.
I think her understanding is correct. Mm-hmm. So let's see, 1945. Yeah, he moved to, no, he was already in London. He bought that nudist colony, and he founded the Bricketwood Coven. That was in conjunction with the nudist colony. So he was recruiting members to be part of the nudist colony and part of the Bricketwood Coven. He found at a local museum there was this 16th century cottage that was apparently previously inhabited by witches. And now I can't remember if it was witches that were actually tried in the witch trials, but it was somehow related to witches. And he was really interested in that cottage, not college. And he traded something big for it. I think he traded a piece of land for it. But he went and bought the cottage from the museum, had it disassembled, moved to the Bricketwood estate, and then reassembled there. And I think it's still there. That's where they did a bunch of their rituals. I was looking on the Wikipedia about it, and I think there's a picture in there from 2007. So at least as late as 2007, it's still there, as far as I know. So that was back in 1945. He was obviously too old to be drafted into World War II, but he was very interested in the war and repelling Germany. He was definitely a very nationalist person, I would say. He had a lot of love for Britain. And I don't really cover it all that much in this history, but I'll say really quickly, he and his contemporaries did a ritual to repel Germany from the shores of Britain. They sent up, it was a cone of energy, and they sent up a message to be sent over to Germany that said, you cannot come, you cannot come. So I guess it kind of worked, maybe, but at least they did that during the war. And he was also very involved in being an air raid warden and all kinds of other things related to the war. He was, like I said, he was interested in weapons when he was younger, so he was very interested in war and that kind of stuff. But he just didn't fight in the war. He was doing all this stuff on the home turf. So 1946, this is an interesting part of the history. I don't really know how this fits in with the rest of the stuff that he was doing. He was ordained as a priest in what was called the Ancient British Church, which isn't something that a lot of people would be familiar with. The Wikipedia page on this says that it ceased to exist in 1944, yet he was ordained as a priest in 1946. So I don't know if there's two churches going by the same name there. But the Ancient British Church, as far as he knew, was an open monotheist faith church. So it's kind of strange because he talks later about there being a god and a goddess, the horned god and the goddess who is has something to do with nature, I think. But he's also ordained as a priest in a monotheist church. So I don't really know how those things work together. But that happened in 1946. Actually, there's a lot of stuff that happened. He did a lot of stuff in 1946. He joined the Ancient British Church. He joined a Druidry order. He joined a folklore society. And he joined the Society for, what is it called? Psychical Research. So he was interested in being a psychic as well. All this kind of stuff. He was really, really interested in bringing in all kinds of things from all different backgrounds into Wicca and building it up as much as he could. So 1947 comes around, and he's introduced to Aleister Crowley. So now the plot thickens even more, because Aleister Crowley, if you don't know, he was called the Beast 666. That's the name that he liked going by, and he had a religion called Thelema. Lots of dark magic. So this is opposed to what Margaret Murray was talking about. Lots of black magic, lots of sex magic. Aleister Crowley, for example, bought a house on Loch Ness that apparently had been a church that had burned down with all the people inside of it. And he wanted it for that reason because it was haunted or something. So he's a very weird guy. and there was a lot of dark influence on Gardner from Aleister Crowley. But he was the leader of a movement called the Ordo Templi Orientis. And I'm not sure how many degrees there are. I think the 5th degree is the highest in that, maybe the 4th degree, I'm not sure. But Gardner became fast friends with Crowley and became a 4th degree member. And then this was at the time when Aleister Crowley was nearing the end of his life. And after he died, there was actually a document he signed to hand over leadership of that to Gardner. So Gardner, for a brief period of time, not for a long time, but for a brief period of time, he was the leader of this very dark cult, the Ordo Templi Orientis. And like I said, Thelema is the name of the religion of Aleister Crowley. Thelema is a Greek word which means divine will. The common phrase that people would know from Aleister Crowley is, do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. I think I got that right. And, even though Gardner didn't really do the black magic stuff, he really did follow that mantra. What he wanted to do is what he did. He didn't really submit himself to a higher order all that much, at least as much as Christians know it. He was definitely just off doing his own thing his whole life, really. Yeah, he was just trying to bring in a whole bunch of stuff into Wicca all at the same time. And I don't think it really mattered to him whether it contradicted or not.
Which,
But anyway,
ironically, I mean, sounds a lot like Muhammad. Earlier, you said that
oh yeah,
he mistook a word and thought that he had something there. And we hear in the Islamic sources how Muhammad is being accused of just passing on tales of the ancients and passing them off as his revelation. Now, to be clear, I don't think Gardner's claiming divine revelation, right? He's not claiming to be a prophet per se,
no,
but he's doing the same kind of thing where he's gathering all these diverse sources. He's taking all kinds of information, and if it sounds cool to him, he's making it part of his religion, even if it contradicts something that he previously said.
right. Yeah, he and Muhammad were both really interested in, well, starting their own religion. Obviously, Muhammad said he was the final prophet of God. Gardner didn't go that far. I don't think he wasn't super interested in God in that kind of respect. It wasn't a monotheistic personal God so much as it was a way to find, and I hesitate to say this, but deity within himself, which makes it sound very New Age, but it's not quite the same thing as a lot of New Agey things. Do you have any comments you want to bring up, or?
No,
Okay.
there's just distraction in the chat, and I was just typing a message to the chat. That's all.
Okay. Well, I'll keep going. 1947 and 48, he visited relatives in Memphis in the U.S. Excuse me. And he wanted to visit New Orleans and learn voodoo because why not? Why not bring something else into it? I don't know if he actually got down there to learn that, but at that time he was still the head of the OTO, the Ordo Templi Orientis. But shortly after that, I think he gave up that to someone else. That's an interesting comment you got there. Therefore, they're supporting Wiccanism.
Yeah, from Sola Scriptura, Muslims should be condemning the Wiccan cult, but instead they're attacking Christianity. Therefore, they are implicitly supporting Wiccanism. And we've had quite a number. It's very interesting. I do streams on Islam all the time, and I get 2-3 Muslims in the chat. Today, we've had a whole host of Muslims come in here, and
Hi.
none of them want to talk about the topic at hand. They all want to either talk about themselves and how they are supposedly persecuted, or they want to talk about Christianity and how it supposedly has 3 gods. Seems that they are implicitly supporting, because this stream is about criticizing Wicca. They are implicitly trying to support Wicca by distracting and changing the topic.
Yeah, I could see that. I don't think any Muslim's going to come out, obviously, and say, hey, Wicca's good. But yeah, trying to take down Christianity. Well, if they came in and said that Wicca was bad, would you think that they were implicitly supporting Christianity?
No.
So I don't know if they're implicitly supporting Wicca by taking down Christianity. I think anyone in this chat that is just trying to take down Christianity is just trying to do that.
Well, yeah. to be clear, they're not necessarily really supporting Wicca, but
Right, right.
they are definitely interested in changing the topic and distracting.
That's true. Yeah, I know how to spot a red herring. All right, so let's keep going. Gardner had the first initiates in his religion in 1949 and 1950, and around that time, there's not a really date on it. Late 1940s to the early 1950s. Well, even so late as 1957, there's writings that are compiled together in what he called the Book of Shadows. I don't know where he got the name, but the Book of Shadows, it really should be called a Book of Shadows because there's a lot of books of shadows that people have created after Gardner. I suppose he created the first one, and that's what people used for a long time. But like I said earlier, it was a list of rituals that worked and other notes, just a compilation of things. And he actually encouraged people to add to it and to make their own thing. So it's just the first of many books of shadows. It's not like the Bible or the Quran where it's wholly authoritative and nothing else is as authoritative. It's kind of a do what you want thing. So yeah, there's the Aleister Crowley, do what thou will. I have a couple readings from that, really short little clips, just so you can get an idea of what he was writing about. So I mentioned earlier that skyclad meant to be naked. And there's a section in there called skyclad. So this is a little reading from that. A couple working with nothing but lust will never attain in any case. So clearly he wasn't concerned with lust. He wanted to be a nudist, but it wasn't so much about lust. But a couple who love each other dearly should already be sleeping together. So take that with a grain of salt. And the first frenzy of love will have passed, and their souls will already be in sympathy. So I think what he's trying to get at is that when a bunch of people come together and do nudist things as pagans, there's a desire to be really promiscuous and lustful, and he wasn't really interested in that. Now we could go into a whole conversation about Muhammad and Aisha and Zayed's wife and all that kind of stuff. Actually, if you want to talk about it, you can. I think that's a point where they actually don't overlap between Gardner and Muhammad because Gardner wasn't so concerned with lust.
Yeah, that's actually quite unusual for a founder of a new religion to
Yeah.
not be interested in their own sexual desires. It's not
Mhm.
just Muhammad. It seems to be a very, very common pattern in
That's true.
these
Yeah.
creators of new religions, where it seems to be all about the women that they get to sleep with.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. It's unfortunate. And also, like I was saying earlier, he didn't really understand Christianity all that well. He actually never got formal education because he was traveling for so much. So since the Bible was probably being taught in all the schools, maybe that has something to do with it. But here in the Book of Shadows, he quotes from the Bible in his section called To Help the Sick. And just real quick, there's still good stuff in that book. There's a kernel of truth in this kind of stuff. He's talking about being loving and helping people and all that stuff, which is definitely a biblical truth. I mean, you even see that in Islam. That's a universal truth, but he goes further than that and corrupts it. So he says, the Bible speaks, a merry heart doth. Oh no, I'm not going to get the old English. A merry heart does good like medicine, but a broken spirit breaks the bones. And then he goes to say, but you may not have a merry heart. And I think a Christian would say that a merry heart would come from knowing Christ. He says, but you can have a merry heart in the cult. And he actually uses the word cult. There be secret processes by which your will and imagination may be influenced. So it seems very actually Gnostic. If you know enough, you'll be able to know God and you'll have a merry heart through that. So yeah, you can see that kind of influence in there as well. And then there's another
Yeah,
section called, or you go ahead.
I was gonna say I can definitely see that connection there between Gnosticism and the uh, founding of Wicca here. I
Yeah.
can also see a strong connection between Gnosticism and the founding of Islam. The Quran borrows
Mm.
from lots of Gnostic sources. The the Sufi sect of Islam is all about this kind of hidden knowledge. There's supposedly 4 levels of knowledge, and the regular people are down at the bottom, and only the Sufi saints are up at the top, where they
Mm,
actually know the truth of the matter. So there is a lot of elements of Gnosticism in Islam. They're just well hidden from the public,
okay.
including the average Muslim. The average Muslim knows nothing about this, but I've done several shows on the Gnostic connections to Islam.
Hmm. I want to get your thought on this quotation from the Book of Spells because it specifically calls out Christians. So if anyone had any doubts about him not being a Christian, then I think this would make it pretty clear. And this is in a section called the Old Laws. And strictly to keep the old law, never accept money for the use of the art being the art of Wicca. It is Christian priests and sorcerers who accept money for the use of their arts, and they sell evil love spells and pardons to let men escape from their sins. Be not as these, be not as these. What do you think about that?
Yeah, that's very interesting. I've never been in a church where they were selling love spells
Yeah,
or pardons for that
me neither.
matter.
That'd be one
But
interesting church.
but it is a common accusation that we constantly hear from people who are not Christians. They kind of try to, it's ironic because often these people are atheists and they supposedly don't believe in
Hmm.
any objective morality, and then they try to say that implicitly say that they're a better person, that most Christians are just
Yeah,
hypocrites out for money, that they're telling us not to do this while they're doing it behind closed doors,
right.
that kind of thing. It's probably the most common accusation made against Christianity, just broadly speaking, not against any specific group, but or by any specific group, I mean, but broadly speaking, the most common criticism of Christianity is kind of like this, where, either you're hypocrites because you're doing things that you're telling others not to do, or you're hypocrites because you're really motivated by money, not love of God. One of the two.
Hmm. Yeah, that's true. Now I've got, so that's pretty much the end of the biography of Joan Gardner. Actually, I think I skipped forward a little bit. Oh yeah, I missed one thing real quick. He compiled the Book of Shadows in the late 1940s, like I said, but then he published a book called Witchcraft Today in 1954, which is supposed to be kind of a summation of the contemporary witchcraft practices of the day. And that became a very popular book. That really helped the religion spread a lot. Um, yeah, that involved being sky clad, like I said earlier. That was a big part of it. And you'll see that a lot of people talk about that nowadays. He died in 1963. He was coming back from Lebanon. He was age 79 at that point. So a lot of this stuff was when he was 52 years old to 79 years old. So um, he was an old patriarch in the religion. You could say that much. Like I said, priestesses were brought in later. There's this one woman whose name I can't remember right now, but she was like the first high priestess that he ordained in his religion. And she actually helped him write the Book of Shadows, and specifically to remove the influence from Aleister Crowley. So there definitely was a departure from the black magic stuff of Aleister Crowley and a return to the white magic stuff of Margaret Murray. But even still, we know that magic is not the right way, whether you go good magic or bad magic. Yeah, so that's pretty much the end of his life. But I have a couple points here on comparisons
Yeah.
between
So,
him and Muhammad.
but yeah, before you move on, a couple comments or questions from the audience,
Send him over.
from Matthew 24:4. Hey, Julian, do you know about the book Shams al-Marif? It's Wicca's Heart.
I do not. I'll have to look that up. There
All
is,
right.
I've seen some claims of influence of occultism in Islam, and I'm wondering if that's what that is.
Excellent. And this isn't on topic, but since it was asked directly, what was that lady saying of how her sandals were stolen a number of times when she was at a mosque? So that was the other day. Lindsay was on the channel,
Mm,
and she's an ex-Muslim, and she said that because you have to take off your shoes to go into the mosque, that periodically while she was in mosque worshiping, someone would steal her shoes. So very interesting behavior. And so that I just wanted to
Specifically
clarify this
her
before it's
shoes?
put up. Presumably they stole a bunch of shoes and not just
Oh,
her
okay.
shoes, but yeah.
Huh. Yeah, don't do that.
And yeah. And then I wanted to put up this comment from T. Bishop. There are mega churches who milk the congregation and do not serve Jesus as
True.
Jesus commands. And that's true.
True.
And as Christians, we have no qualms with calling out people who are falsely preaching the gospel. Indeed, this is exactly what Jesus said that would happen, that many would come in his name and be false teachers, and that our responsibility is to call people out who are false teacher and prevent them from leading others into error.
Yeah, you could also see an overlap between the stuff that we were just talking about and the modern churches, in that there's kind of a Gnostic element to both of them. So the modern megachurches, I'm not going to make a blanket statement. Obviously, it's not every megachurch necessarily, but there's definitely examples of this where they'll say, you might have thought that you had the right way to Christianity, and not in these exact words. They're a lot more eloquent than I will be. But they'll say, you might have thought that you had the right way to do things in life, that you had the right knowledge about Jesus. But we actually have the true knowledge, and we'll tell you, if you make a seed donation to our church, then blessings will flow into your life. They claim to know how to make God your servant to do whatever you want by seeding money into a church. I would definitely say run away from that, because that just screams Gnosticism.
Definitely.
All right.
And I want to get your thoughts on this comment from Tim. Witchcraft and money tend to go hand in hand in the scripture.
There's a couple passages on witchcraft that I'll have to look up again. I think that's right. I actually sent those to my sister because we were talking about that. And there's specifically ones that say, I was talking to her about casting spells, and there's specifically one, and I'm totally going to butcher this, but I think it's in Jeremiah somewhere, where God specifically says that casting spells is evil. He calls that out especially. And I think in similar passages, there's stuff about money too, but don't take my word on that. I'm not an expert on that passage, or I don't really remember what it said.
Yeah,
but I think
I'm not.
that sounds about right.
Yeah, I'm not 100% certain or not about whether they're often tied together. Now, they're clearly both condemned, right? The love of money and practicing witchcraft are both clearly condemned. And there certainly are instances where people seem to be practicing witchcraft for money. I'm thinking of in particular, the narrative in Acts, where a powerful individual whose name escapes me off the top of my head, but he comes and he's like, "Can you teach me?
I
Can
know
you
who you're
teach
talking
me
about.
to do what you're doing through the Holy Spirit? I'm ready to pay you. I'm ready to give you money to do that."
I know exactly who you're talking about, and the name escapes me as well. It's not Simon, is it? Simon something?
Yeah, it might be. Yeah, and someone in chat said Simon as well. I think that's correct.
Yeah, Simon. It's like Simon the something. It's not Simon the Zealot, but it's Simon something else. Oh, Simon Magus. That's what it is. Simon Magus. Simon the Magician, I guess.
Yes.
I just looked it up real quick. One of the passages about casting spells. I think there's still one in Jeremiah, but Deuteronomy 18. Deuteronomy 18:11 says, or 10-11 says, "Let no one be found among you who sacrifices his son or daughter in the fire, practices divination or conjury, interprets omens, practices sorcery, casts spells, consults a medium or spiritist, or inquires of the dead." So no Ouija boards.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
We've actually talked a lot about the points of overlap that I had here already. The last one, I guess, would be magic, actually. I saw a recent video. Well, it's not a recent video. I recently saw a video from David Wood back when he was doing the Jesus or Muhammad series with Sam Shamoon. And there was a section on there about magic. Specifically, he was quoting from Sahih al-Bukhari 3175 and 5765. In 3175, it says that Muhammad had a spell cast over him And it goes into more detail in 5765, where it says he was confused so that he was thinking he was sleeping with his wives when he actually wasn't. And it was done by a comb that had a piece of his hair on it, and it was used to cast a spell against him, or a hex against him. And David made a really good observation there. First, he compared it to his own life because he said that a Wiccan priest actually tried to hex him, to curse him, but it didn't work. And he quoted he quoted 1 John 4:4 by saying that the spirit that lives in him is greater than the spirit that lives within the world. 1 John 4:4 says that God has overcome the things of the world, and that the spirit, he is greater than the spirits that are in the world. And David made the observation that the spell cast against him didn't work because the spirit that lives in him is greater than that of the world. But the spirit that lived within Muhammad clearly was not able to prevent a spell being cast against him. So take from that what you will. I think it's pretty obvious.
Yeah, definitely. You may not know this since you don't specialize in Islam, but the kind of Islam that's propagated to the public, the Salafi Islam, is only in reality a small minority of Islam. Global Islam is very synchronistic. It has a lot of elements of magic and practice of traditional tribal religions, especially in Southeast Asia, that it's very much a combination of the existing culture and the practice, which includes the practice of magic. So there's definitely a lot of magic elements in Islam. And the Sufism, which is often considered to be the highest form of Islam by, obviously that's going to depend on who you ask, but they think that, and this is very much ingrained in mainstream Islam, that the words of the Quran have magical powers, that you gain. I'm looking for the right word, but benefits of some sort, right? It's not
Blessings?
exactly a spell per se. Yeah, blessings or, but it's not just like generalized blessings. It's like specific, like reciting
Oh,
specific
okay.
words give you specific things. So it's not exactly like a spell, but it's very kind of similar. That the words themselves have magical powers. Of course, only when you say them in Arabic.
Of course. 7th century Arabic.
Yes, yes. So it's definitely an element of Islam. We see, I mean, we already made this comparison, but I'm going to say it again, that we see Muhammad kind of just grabbing a little bit, or, whoever was creating Islam, whether it's one individual or multiple people, there's some historical debate there. But for the sake of argument, let's just call it that person or people, Muhammad. They see, like, grabbing a little bit from here, a little bit from here, just kind of mixing it all together. So you end up getting a lot of elements of traditional pagan religions of Arabia mixed into Islam. And a lot of these things have survived to today. Now, people don't necessarily know why they're doing these things. They don't know the historical origins. I'm not saying that the average Muslim on the street is intentionally practicing witchcraft, and
Right.
don't get me wrong, but they're doing things that have their origins in these pagan ideas. And as a result, people who are very knowledgeable and are, high up, so to speak, in the pyramid of knowledge, they realize that there are magical elements behind a lot of what goes on in ordinary Islam.
I think there's a good conversation there talking about pagan influences on Islam and Christianity. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that a lot of the practices done in Mecca come from pagan roots, like kissing the stone, running back and forth between the hills in the area, things like that. Is
Mhm.
that right?
Yeah, that's correct. And if we take the Hadith seriously, we even have some of the companions of Muhammad saying, "I wouldn't have done this. It seems like paganism to me, but Muhammad said to do it, so it must be okay."
Mm. And the point I have of comparison with Christianity is that there actually are things, I think, that may have been pagan in origin that were grafted into Christianity, but it's not. There's a difference between that and what I've seen done in Islam. People are going to say that I'm lying about that probably, but it's kind of like Christianizing a pagan practice. It's not. Some people will say that all the religions, or not all the religions, all the holidays are pagan. I don't think they are. By the way, Inspiring Philosophy has a great series of videos on religions and why they're not pagan. I highly suggest you look at those. But an example that comes to mind is Paul talking to the Judaizers, or to the people who were being influenced by the Judaizers. And those are people who were saying that you had to do the Old Testament laws in order to be a Christian. That's not a pagan thing, but I think around that same time, he's talking to people who are concerned with going to an unbeliever's house and eating the meat that they had, which had been sacrificed to their idol, which is absolutely a pagan practice. And he says, this obviously isn't something that's brought into pagan, or not pagan, that's brought into Christianity as a practice. We don't sacrifice meat to idols. But he's saying, you can go and eat that meat because, well, you didn't sacrifice it to an idol. You're not. The conscience matters here. This is a potentially pagan thing that a lot of people might turn their nose up at, but you can go do it because God lives within you and he's stronger than those things. And this is not something that you're willingly taking in pardon to turn away from God. So yeah, I think that's an interesting comparison. I don't know I don't know of scripture or hadiths or something in Islam which would say that you can go do these practices, but remember who Allah is. It seems to me that pagan practices brought into Islam remain pagan practices.
Yeah, I think so. That's an important clarification there. And, to be clear, I haven't seen any solid evidence that Christianity has taken any customs or traditions from pagan background. But even if they did, even if Christians do something that pagans used to do, it would be redeeming of that thing, that everything is provided by God,
Right.
to use an example that isn't actually pagan, but people often say is, a Christmas tree, right?
Yeah.
Let's say for
I
argument,
know that one.
and it's because that connection with nature and all, and
Yeah.
Pagans used to do that, except they didn't. There's no evidence they ever did. But
No, the naturalism was
God
brought in
provides
by
the
Margaret
tree,
Murray.
right? the God is the creator of the tree. There's nothing about a tree that makes it pagan. So if Christians take a tree and they use it as they put it in their home because it creates nice fragrance and it's pretty to look at, and it has nothing to do with any sort of pagan ritual, then
Right.
it's not pagan, even if some pagan did the same thing.
Until you
But in
kneel down in
Islam,
front of it, apparently.
right, right, yeah, we accidentally bow down to the tree because we bow down to put presents under it. And,
Now you got to do all kinds of
complete
stuff to
nonsense,
cleanse yourself.
right?
Yeah.
but but in Islam, it's not about your intentions. It's solely about your actions. That if you do something that is wrong, that Allah has forbidden, even if it's accidental, right? Even if you do it by accident,
Right.
then you're still at the same level of guilt. Similarly, if you do something that is technically not, like, has the same effect as what's forbidden, but is not technically what's forbidden, that's perfectly okay. So an easy example
Yeah.
of this would be that interest is forbidden, right? That you can't charge people interest. Well, guess what? In the Islamic world, they still have banks. They just charge fees instead. That they charge fees. They charge it. So the way they do it through a contract. So what they usually do is someone say that an object's worth $100 and someone wants to buy it now and they don't actually have $100, they will write a contract where they pay $125 for that object that's worth $100, and they pay it over time with no interest. So it has the same exact effect as interest, but it's not technically
Right.
interest. and that's allowed in Islam. So it's all about
I,
the technicalities.
I'm reminded of a quote from Futurama. Technically correct. The best kind of correct.
Right.
You think God cares about technicalities? Like, of course he does. You're not going to get around the law of God. If a law is the true God and he says don't do interest, you're not going to get around it by a technicality. If Yahweh is the true God and he says don't use interest, you're not going to get around it by a technicality. It seems like people are thinking they can fool the creator.
Yeah. And unfortunately, that tends to be what it's all about.
Mm.
You know, Lloyd, who's a regular guest on this channel, puts it well that Islam is a religion of laws and lawyers. And what
Mm-hmm.
do lawyers do? They find ways to get around the law for the sake of their client, right? That
Yeah.
if you're accused of doing something, they say,
Yeah.
"Oh, he it looks like he did that, but he actually did this very similar thing that the law doesn't forbid." And that tends to be
Yeah.
how things work in Islam,
That's
unfortunately.
so draining. So you're saying that Muslims make very good lawyers?
Yeah, I think so. They potentially make very good lawyers. They have lots of
Lots,
experience
lots of
on
training.
finding loopholes.
Yeah.
So did you have anything else you wanted to point out on similarities?
I'm trying to think now. You got me talking about interest, and I kind of lost my train of thought. Oh, hold on. It's coming back to me. Yeah. You were saying that trees as a Christmas thing would be considered pagan by some people, but you would say it's something that God created and we can use it and it's no big deal. There are people who will say, as a Wiccan, God created the ability to use spells, and I'm just using something that God created. I'm just doing white magic. What would you say to that?
Well, yeah, so that would be in a different category, right? If
Okay.
the Bible said that you shall not look at a tree, right? Or something. You should never chop down a tree. Let's put it that way. You shall never chop down a tree for any purpose. Well, then that would
Mm-hmm.
clearly be forbidden, and you were clearly forbidden from using magic spells. But I don't want to make this sound arbitrary, like God forbids it, therefore it's wrong, because God always has reasons behind what He does. And
Right.
what you're doing when you're practicing a spell, right? You're trying to be your own God, so to speak. You're trying to control things that are
Mm,
naturally beyond your control. You're
right.
trying to take control of creation, and thus you're tapping in. You're kind of, in reality, you're usually probably just fooling yourself. But for the sake of argument, if you're actually tapping into real things that would be, magic, what you're
Uh-huh.
really doing is you're tapping into the spiritual world, and you're conjuring up demons. You're conjuring up evil spirits that are
Right.
assisting to do something you couldn't otherwise do.
So here's an interesting thought. A lot of Christians, back when it came out and still now, I'm sure, condemn Harry Potter for casting spells and being about witchcraft and magic and all that stuff. And I get where they're coming from. However, I think it's a similar category error. So you were saying that Christmas trees, for example, are a material thing that's in the world and is put there by God, but casting spells are um, communing with the spiritual realm and trying to bring something into the world that God didn't put there. If you take the story of Harry Potter in this fictional world, magic is something that's inherent in the world. It would be a material thing within that world. It's not conjuring up a demon from another, from the spiritual realm. If they actually did do that, then I would say, yeah, Harry Potter seems to be um, promoting actual witchcraft. But within the confines of the historical, the fictional book that J.K. Rowling wrote, it seems like the category is perfectly fine, just like you'd find with a Christmas tree or, I don't know, a cross. Some people say that crosses are pagan. Yeah, same kind of
Yeah,
thing. It's category
that
errors.
yeah, that's a very interesting way of thinking about it, and I would agree. I like the way you put it, though. You put it much better than I would have. that because in the fictional world, and it's very important that it's clear that this is fiction, right? First of all, that's
Right.
important
Yes.
as well.
Yes.
It's not like anyone's reading Harry Potter and thinking that this is reality.
Except for the
Um,
Wiccans.
right. but but you're right. In that fictional world, it's kind of just part of the world, right?
Right.
It's just
Right.
part of the way things work. It's almost like a new physical law, and no
Yeah.
one says that, right?
Yeah.
Like you're in violation of God's commands by taking advantage of the physical laws that exist
Right.
and using them towards your benefit.
And it's still subject to the moral law. Like it doesn't suddenly in Harry Potter, if you kill someone, it's not like, oh, you use magic, so it's fine. Murder is still murder, for example.
Exactly. Exactly. So here's an interesting question from Rose Petal. Do you believe in witchcraft? I'll let you answer first.
Okay. I think there's a very good video that I'll probably have to find for you at some point from Frank Turek. He's a apologist of mine that I like a lot, and he makes the distinction between believing in things and believing that things. So there's a lot of people that believe that God exists. So what? But there's a lot of people also that believe in God, and that is the distinction. That's the important thing that makes you a believer. For witchcraft, I believe that witchcraft exists, and I think that's probably what you're getting at in your question. I believe that witchcraft does exist. Absolutely. I think that there's all kinds of stuff that you can do with witchcraft, but I also think that it's summoning demons. I think you shouldn't believe in witchcraft. You shouldn't put your hope in it. Your faith should not be found in witchcraft. And as a Christian, I would say that your faith is found in Jesus Christ.
Excellent, excellent. And I'll just add to that a little because I'm pretty sure she's asking whether you believe that witchcraft is possible, which is
Yeah.
that important distinction you made. And I think you just have to look at the Exodus account where the magicians of Pharaoh were able to reproduce some of the
hmm
signs of Moses and not
Yeah.
others. So it exists to a limit, right? That
Right.
the
Right.
but by calling on dark forces, by calling on demons, you are able to do some things that could not be done naturally, by human effort alone. But
Mm,
you can't do everything. There's a difference between a demon who has more ability than a human and God who is all powerful. And
right.
only God can work a true miracle where he violates the laws of nature. Now, some things may appear miraculous or appear like magic to us because they're beyond our abilities, but they're not
Right.
on the same level as what God can do.
I wrote down another scripture reference that I was going to use later, but it's actually really relevant right now. It's Luke 10:17-20. I'm just going to read the first verse, and it says, and this is when Jesus sent out the 72 people in pairs to go and disciple the nations. And they said, the 72 returned with joy and said, Lord, even the demons submit to us in your name. Pretty cut and dry right there. Like the demons exist, the demons are possible, they have power, but they submit to people in the name of Christ.
Exactly. So, where would you like to go from here?
Actually, that's pretty much the end of when I came here to
Excellent.
say.
Excellent.
Yeah, it's a
So,
nice way to
if the
wrap it up.
audience has any questions, we'll take those now. If you want to come up and ask your question live, you can go to theology.chat. We'll give it a few minutes to see if anyone has any questions, but if not, we'll end it here. Uh, for anyone who tuned in late and you didn't hear the introduction about who Julian is, he has a YouTube channel. A link to that is found in the video description. I definitely encourage everyone to go and check that out.
It's also just my name, so it's really easy to look up. Julian Gentry. The name is on the screen, or it should be, so really easy to look up.
Excellent. Uh, so MM said, what about the number 72? So there's no context to this, but 72 is found very commonly in Islam. It seems to have some
Oh, does it?
special powers in it.
Mm,
Of course, most famously, 72 virgins, but it occurs many other
Right.
places
Right.
as well.
Yeah,
So
72 in the scripture was the number of disciples that Jesus sent out to the varying towns. He sent them out by pairs to go and disciple people. That's what I was referring to, at least in Luke. So yeah, I wonder if
and
there's some kind of connection there.
yeah, I'm not actually sure. I haven't made an effort to research this in depth, but I've heard that 72 is supposed to be like an infinitely large number symbolically in the Arab
Um,
culture, but I don't
okay.
know if that's really true.
Hmm.
So Marion says witchcraft is superstition. If someone appears to be affected by a spell from a witch, I believe they did it to themselves through a reversed placebo, if you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's also a lot of scrupulosity, I would think, meaning that you don't think that you've actually attained salvation or whatever. Christians can be pretty scrupulous because we have faith in God, but then we think that the actions that we do aren't enough or whatever, and that we have to atone for it or something. And if you're spending your life casting spells in order to make the world work in the way that you want, and then it doesn't because it almost always doesn't, then I think you could feel really scrupulous, like you think you're not doing enough. You're not doing enough to have justification or salvation or to find God or to realize your inner spiritual deity or whatever the term is. And that can, gosh, that can corrode someone so easy. You can go down a really dark hole that way.
Yeah, definitely. So you gave David's little story about attempted witchcraft earlier. I
Yeah.
have one of my own.
Oh,
Um,
cool.
uh, Third party through
Ah,
another
I see.
through one of my best friends. He said that his at the time his wife and now ex-wife, that she was hanging out with this other individual who thought he was a witch. He was
Mm-hmm.
male, so he called himself a wizard, but same idea. And he claimed that he had prophesized that my friend was going to die, and that he was going to marry his wife, and he said
Oh
this
no.
to their faces.
Is your friend's name Uriah for by chance? Is his wife
and
named Bathsheba?
yeah, and his wife, who at least claimed to be a Christian, probably wasn't really, but at least claimed to be a Christian. She was very concerned about this. She thought it was real, that he had really had that ability, and this particular individual was trying to cast spells and stuff. So it's definitely out there. There are definitely
Weird.
people who believe in this stuff, who attempt to practice it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I guess that's all I would say of it. Couple, we do have several questions from the chat coming in here, so let me get to a couple of those. Should we take cultic fairy tales, games, and Disney movies lightly? So it's kind of, a follow-up to that Harry Potter question, I guess. Where is the line? Where does
Yep.
something become unacceptable?
It depends on what you mean by lightly. Take them lightly. Um, you know, there's a lot of people that have reverence for them that are Christians, and I don't think that's necessarily wrong. Um, there's a lot of druidry in some of C.S. Lewis's writings, um, and there's a lot of things in Catholic history that come through in Tolkien's writings that are kind of the same. And it's the same as with a probably it's the same as with a Christmas tree. If it's something in the world that's subject to the laws of the universe and it's put here by God, um, the conscience is what makes the difference between something being good and bad. Um, Not always, of course. There's obviously things that are clearly wrong. But if you watch a Disney movie, for example, because you want to have a nice time with your kids and watch a nice Disney movie, like no problem. But if you're watching a Disney movie because you think those characters are actually real and there's some deity in your life, then there's a big problem there. It's about discernment.
Yeah, yeah, I would say something similar that you know you don't want to take anything lightly. Like you want to take
No.
everything seriously. You want to um, you want let's put it this way. Everything you do matters, right? Everything you do should be for the benefit of God. We're told to pray constantly, which doesn't,
Mhm.
mean that we're on our knees with our hands crossed
Right.
constantly, of course.
Right.
But everything we do is supposed to reflect the glory of God. And as Christians, we believe that we have the indwelling Holy Spirit, and that we are the image bearers of God, that we are his representatives on earth. So
Mhm.
we don't want to take anything lightly in that sense. Um, I also don't think
Yeah.
that we want to go the other route and just say that, we blanketly condemn all these things, that we blanketly say that, oh, it's always wrong to watch a tale, or it's always
Right.
wrong to watch a fictional story that contains magic or something along those lines.
Yeah.
And earlier, Too Many Marys uh, on these lines said, reading mysteries, I'm going to add the word murder mysteries here, reading murder mysteries
Mm.
doesn't encourage killing people. So if
Right.
you're going to say that reading about fantasy magic encourages people to practice magic, then you would have to make the same argument that if you read a murder mystery, it's because you are encouraging killing people. Or if you read any, well, let's make it even more broad. Any fictional story is by definition false, right? It's by definition not true. So are you
Right.
encouraging lying by reading fiction? And I don't think you are. We understand that there's a difference between lying and something that is false, but everyone knows it's false and no one treats it as if it was truth.
Right.
Welcome to the chat, Nicodemus.
Hello. I'm sorry about not having a camera on. I'm having a bad hair day. So,
Oh, it's fine.
um, yeah, I'm gonna. I hope you guys don't mind if I play the role of the fanatic Christian here. Um, I'm definitely like my walk back to the faith, and I've talked about this before in other streams, involved um, tampering, messing around with Tai Chi, Magic
Mm.
the Gathering, which I talk about a lot. Are you guys familiar with the card game Magic the Gathering?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so um, I don't want to bore you guys, but let me share my experiences, and you guys, the audience, can make of it what they will. I mean, even when it comes to miracles, right? You can talk about whatever, and it's at the end of the day, it's just words. It's one of those things that you have to experience to kind of believe. But so in the same weekend, while I was for a while, I'd been tampering with Magic the Gathering with my cousin, who introduced me to the game. I noticed a streak of bad luck. So maybe that could be a coincidence or whatever. But that same weekend, my cousin had asked me, like, hey, Nick, have you been experiencing a streak of bad luck? And as soon as he asked me that, I mean, that's exactly where my head went. And I was like, yeah, why do you ask? He's like, well, you might think this is crazy, but, ever since we've been playing the Magic the Gathering, I feel like I was like, whoa, okay, so whatever, wrote that off. But then in that same weekend, he was talking me through an exercise, a Tai Chi exercise. We were studying uh, ninjutsu. So we were doing different kinds of meditation. And this exercise was supposed to expand your chi energy, which is supposed to be this like life force that, if you ever watch like certain kung fu movies or whatever, it's basically, or the Tibetan monks where they have this mind over matter thing where you can put like a sword on their neck and then feel nothing kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the whole thing. It was supposed to be expanding your chi energy to give yourself a kind of armor, but also in the case you're blinded, you can kind of sense your surroundings. And so as he was taking me through this meditation, um, we did a lying down meditation. And so I went through what can be considered as sleep paralysis, which
Hmm.
some other streams also talked about that, what sleep paralysis is and how it may or may not be tied to the spiritual realm, or whether or not it's self hypnosis or what it is. But for those who are not familiar with sleep paralysis, essentially what happens is just like the title says, you become paralyzed. You lose control of your body and you lose control of your breathing. And another symptom of this is that you feel a weight on your chest, which I remember clearly. And that kind of sounds almost like a heart attack too. So
Yeah.
what happened? Yeah. So what happened to me was, I mean, I didn't know what was going on at that point in my life. I was a skeptic. I didn't really believe in anything. Anybody who would bring up miracles or whatever, I kind of snicker, not because they're trying to be mean, but because I just didn't believe in anything like that.
Right.
So as an unsuspecting person, doing this exercise, I'm like, okay, whatever. I suddenly, like I said, I lost control of my breathing, which was part of the exercise. Of course, that's part of meditation. I lost control of my ability to move. I wanted to say something to my cousin. I realized I couldn't even speak. And so I started panicking. Of course, I had the weight on my chest. And I heard from others, okay, well, this must be a heart attack. And so I struggled as much as I could. I couldn't snap out of it. And finally, I said, okay, well, you know what? I'm going to die. And I heard that if you ask forgiveness before you die, God can forgive you and maybe you can still go to heaven.
Wow.
Yeah. So at that point, I'm like, okay, all right, God, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for what I did. All right, please take me. And as soon as I surrendered, I felt this crazy, intense, and sudden jerky motion from the center of my body upward
Wow.
toward a light. So that put me in shock. Like I didn't know what to make of it. I was like literally shocked for about 5-10 minutes. Like when someone sees death, they go into this uncontrollable shock. That's what I was experiencing. But of course, I became a believer. So you can argue that tampering with this Tai Chi stuff and all that. I mean, it could maybe lead you to faith and all that, but for me, it was kind of like as a agnostic or atheist, really. It was leaving the door open to a spiritual realm that I had no idea what it was, and it was
Yep.
tampering with stuff that I shouldn't be tampering with. So that's kind of my whole point. I can talk about how, what that experience actually meant. I mean, later years in my life, there was just something that tormented me. Like, why did I? Um, I mean, I heard that I could have been possibly not about experience, and then maybe I left my body susceptible to spirits, or if it were in fact my getting ready to die, and I rejected that I pulled myself away from God. So there was a slight little guilt in that. So I didn't know what to make of the experience. But I could talk about how someone about a decade later crossed my path who was qualified both in psychology and was also a priest. So he was qualified in both. And I saw a sign with him that was let me know that he is something special. And then I ran into him again nonchalantly in a different part of the country when I should have. And he invited me to a thing that he didn't. And I had this discussion with him, and he put it all to rest. In other words, long story short, if I had a calling, then I'm probably not possessed, kind of thing. But anyway, but the point of my rant was this, that I would like to, again, be the more fanatic Christian here and to say that I don't think it's completely wise to take these things lightly, because if we do, we might be leaving ourselves open to the principalities that we don't always want to acknowledge, and we don't really know how they work.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Oh, okay, I wasn't expecting that. Okay.
Yeah,
No, I
think
definitely
that,
think. You go ahead.
yeah, I think that the perhaps most relevant scripture verse here is 1 Corinthians 10:23. All things are permissible, but not all things are
Mm.
beneficial. And
Mhm.
that there's nothing that is by its very nature forbidden. Like it's not forbidden to read Harry Potter stories. It's not forbidden to watch Disney movies. Someone pointed out that there is another concern. We're talking about witchcraft here, but someone pointed out a little while ago how they're now often promoting LGBT stuff in children's programs.
Mhm.
And that's certainly a concern. It's certainly something that we need to be aware of. And I think that know your own self. A lot of people made comments along these lines. Let me just read a couple of them. So Professor Yoffel, if it's a weakness for you, yes, avoid it, like alcohol. It's not
Right.
bad per se, but if you're a former alcohol, you don't have a drink. John A. I personally stay away from that kind of stuff. My conscience doesn't allow for these kinds of exercise.
Mm-hmm.
And here's that comment earlier from Clyte. There's a reason they're putting LGBT stuff in kids' programs on Disney too. That isn't a harmless thing, is it? And then Clyde also said, if you ask me, I'd say that God is saying to stay away from all of it, even in its smallest forms. You never know what is going to impact your young kid in a bad way. And I think that this is all good, all good comments, that we need to be wise. We need to perceive what is really going on and not just blindly absorb this culture. But at the same time, we're called as Christians to live in the world, but not be part of it. We're not called to separate ourselves completely, to cut ourselves off apart from the culture. We, in addition to other things, we lose our ability to witness to people who are lost, people who are in the culture, when we just say, I'm not taking part in anything that goes on because it's not productive. And you're right. In one sense, it's not productive. It's not productive to play computer games. It's not productive to watch a movie, regardless of its content, right? But at the same time, we're not called to be monks living in a desert praying 24/7. That's not really, that's a great relationship with God, but our primary purpose is to be witnesses for God, be witnesses to the world. And to be witnesses to the world, we have to be in the world. We have to be in the culture. We have to understand what's going on so that we can talk to people. So I think it's not a cut and dry situation where it's always wrong or it's always right.
Right. I've got 2 quotes from Paul regarding that. First one, the verse I can't remember right now, but he became all things to all people so that by speaking to all, he might save some. And it specifically says in there, to the people who are outside the law, he became as someone outside the law. Not that he was actually outside the law, not that he wasn't actually following God, but he appeared that way to them so that he might be able to talk to them. So he had discernment there between the things that were actually outside of God's law and the things that were within God's law, but allowed him to talk to people who were outside the law of God. And then the second thing is in Romans 14, first couple verses. For one person has faith to eat all things, while another who is weak eats only vegetables. The one who eats everything must not belittle the one who does not, and the one who does not eat everything must not judge the one who does, for God has accepted him. Clearly, the love of God and being a Christian is more important than the smaller details, the secondary or tertiary things. Some people will say, I'm a Christian and I don't want to eat vegetables. And some people will say, I'm a Christian and I want to eat vegetables. And those things should not be points of judgment between Christians. So say, for example, you don't want to do Tai Chi, but some other Christian does. It's probably not a point of judgment that you should have on them. And I think Tai Chi might be kind of a gray area, because I could totally see how you could have some kind of influence, some spiritual influence. You're not going to have a spiritual influence eating vegetables. Obviously, there's a bit of a category difference there. Or maybe you eat some really special vegetables. I don't know. But I could definitely see that with Tai Chi. I, for example, did yoga for a while in college, and I never got into the stuff where they were talking about chakras and aligning your chakras and all that stuff. I just took it for the stretching of the body that it was. And I think that's perfectly fine. It's using something within the world and not to try and circumvent the law of God and circumvent God's power to do something for ourselves spiritually.
Yeah, can I push back a little bit on that? I don't want to take up all the time here.
Go right ahead.
Yeah, so along the lines of what you just said about doing things just for the physical aspect of it. Mm-hmm. It's ironic that with Tai Chi, once I had that experience, I of course got away from Tai Chi, but I also stopped martial arts because I was having knee problems. So I got away from martial arts altogether.
Mm-hmm.
But I had family members that were young that were struggling with all these emotional issues to the point where they had problems eating. And so I decided to introduce them to the meditative aspect of Tai Chi for that reason, to kind of help them with this emotional distress.
Mm-hmm.
And as I was doing my first meditation with them, again, this sounds crazy. Forgive me, people, for sounding crazy, but whatever, make of it what you will. So while I was talking them through meditation, all of a sudden I had this crazy tingling in my hands. And at the same time, I had this overwhelming joy. So it was like, I don't know what to make of it. But I found out later that what I'm describing is actually what the end goal is, like maybe some kind of nirvana or whatever. Like this tingling, joyous kind of energy is what they're actually trying to achieve. But for me, it was a shock. Like I was not expecting that, and I didn't know what to make of it. And it felt great at first. Like I said, I was joyous, I was happy. But then I was like, whoa, I have no control over this. And there's some kind of weird tingling in my hands. What do I do? So I don't know. I just kind of looked at this wooden table thing. We had this thick side table, thick wood. And so I was like, all right, so I'll just maybe if I punch it, I'll get rid of this energy. And there was a reason I thought of that. I mean, the ninja master, they used to train us with ninjutsu.
Mm-hmm.
He used to do this mind over matter thing with us, where he had people punching on him. And they used to try to get me to punch him, but I wouldn't want to do it. But eventually, I got the devil in me. I was like, all right, you want me to punch you? I'll punch you. And so he braced, and I'm supposed to punch him in the solar plex, but I punched him right in the neck, in the artery. So evil. I know. I'm sorry, people. But the guy did not even budge, move, red mark, nothing. I mean, it's insane. So there's something to that. So that's why I got in my head. Okay, well, if I punch the wood, maybe, I'll get rid of the tingling thing. And I just kind of let loose and punched the table and like felt nothing. There was no marks on my knuckles or nothing, but there was a imprint all around my hand, my knuckles on that wood. So yeah, I mean, I'm talking about that not to make it sound cool, like, you should do Tai Chi so you can punch tables, but but like even when we're, trying to just stick to the meditative physical aspects of it, maybe it's still opening the door to some other things when we're not expecting it.
Yeah, I'm not going to doubt that there's power in those things, of course. It seems like you could absolutely, even if it's unwanted, contact the spiritual realm and all kinds of things like that. Yeah, I'm not going to doubt that there's power there. Clearly, it seems like you're not lying about that story. I believe what you said, but
Either that or I'm really crazy, I'm really convincing.
Yeah.
I don't know what. Can I ask you, Thaddeus, quick tangent, so I don't forget. You had mentioned before a study of the brain and how, there was a study where they saw the brains changing form because of our new internet habits. I don't put you in the spot, but do you happen to remember like any details about that, whose studies it was or anything like that?
Yeah, well, so I obviously don't know the name of the study or whatever off the top of my head, but the gist is that there's kind of two different types of brain cells. There's the kind that can react very quickly to something, and then there's the other kind that can think deeply about something. And they found that modern brain scans are showing that people are having more and more of the quick fire type, because they're primed to make quick reactions to everything. But as a result, they have less ability to think deeply, less ability to really have contemplative thoughts. It's all about instant reaction. And it's not, so much per se about the internet. It's everything in culture. It's how we have a phone that is giving us a notification, and we want to make an instant reaction to that. It's social media where everyone wants to give their knee-jerk reaction to whatever event happened today. And we're all being primed for these instantaneous reactions to things. And as a result, we're losing the ability to have deep contemplative thoughts.
Yeah.
Sorry. Well, so yeah, that's my big research focus and my big concern, considering how much society worldwide has changed in this past decade alone, and how much influence media has. Oh man, I hope I didn't chase off Christian apologetics by over talking, but so yeah, but my concern here is that we've all shifted to some like Facebook or YouTube or whatever it is with the same habits, and there's the censorship is really heavy. So where certain voices, particularly Christian voices, it seems like are being silenced and controlled, and there's even a lot of self-censorship going on, so we don't get kicked off completely.
Right.
So that if that happens and that trend continues, then what's left is nothing but all this anti-Christian stuff, and all these young or just people that are kind of unsuspecting and uh, left out in the wind, so to speak. And that's my big concern if that kind of trend continues.
Well, let me put a positive spin on it though, right?
Please.
Because if the mind is trainable to have quick reactions only, the opposite is also true. If we make intentional steps to, reduce our connection, reduce our desire to know the exact second that someone has something to say, or we intentionally don't react right away. We wait, say, no, I want to have time to gather more evidence and really understand what the situation is before I react. Then we can train our mind to do the opposite as well. And to be clear, being able to react quickly to situations is not a bad thing. The only problem is that we're doing that to the exclusion of other things. So, I mean, that's definitely something that humans need the ability to do. We definitely need the ability to react quickly.
Mm-hmm.
We use this all the time. For example, when we're driving our car, we're driving a vehicle that is potentially very dangerous, and potentially any action we take at any time is fatal. We need the ability to react quickly. We So it's not that reacting quickly is bad. It's that we're losing the ability to think deeply. But the positive side is when we make those intentional steps, we, for example, read a nonfiction book. We, for example, say, I don't need to share my opinion this exact second. I need to gather evidence first. Or we do things like we do on this channel where we go in depth to a topic. We don't just stay at the surface level. Then we can train our brain to be the opposite. So we have a choice in the matter. It's not something that's just being thrust upon us. We can, once we know that this is happening, we can make the conscious choice of how to go forward.
Mm.
So I did want to take a couple of questions that were directly on topic. I did see that Christian Apologetics 2023 was up here for a little bit. Then he dropped. I don't know if he was having issues or he just decided that it wasn't worth waiting. I don't know, but he was welcome up here for sure. But I do have some questions from the audience that were directly on the subject of Wiccan. So let's see. Well, first, a quick comment here from Franz. The so-called Druid Order has in Sweden around 5,000 members. It's bewildering me when I found out because that is a lot here. And we definitely...
There's a book, I haven't read it yet, but there's a book from C.S. Lewis called, I think it's called A Christmas Sermon for Pagans. And I think there's going to be a lot of overlap there between Christianity and paganism and about how to reach out to pagans and kind of how those things intersect. So if you can find a copy of that book, maybe a PDF or something, I suggest you read it because maybe it can help you reach out to pagan people.
Excellent. Yeah, I was going to say that there's definitely growth going on in this area. It's hard to say whether it's kind of slowed or not, but it was definitely growing very rapidly in the early 2000s. Muslims like to say that Islam is the fastest growing religion. And if you look at globally, that's true. I mean, it's due to high birth rate exclusively. If you're looking at just the United States, then New Age type religions are the fastest growing.
I think
religion.
Actually Wicca is the quickest growing.
Yeah. And I can believe it because frankly, atheism is not very appealing. There are very few people who will adhere to atheism long term. There are some. I'm not saying that there aren't, but I don't think human beings are inherently spiritual. We inherently desire the spiritual connection. So when people are rejecting Christianity in the West, they're mostly not becoming atheists. They're mostly seeking out other things. And here, that's primarily in the form of New Age or Wiccan ideas.
I've got a comment on that, actually. I just thought about it. Yeah, if the entire culture was majority secular atheists, I think that would be really difficult. And, that has been difficult in the past. There's been a large wave of atheism, especially in the last, 50 to 100 years. But I was thinking, in the time of Christ, there probably wasn't an atheist around. Everybody believed in some God. And I think that actually makes people more relatable to each other. It's easier to talk to someone about Jesus being the right God because you don't have to explain to them that there is a God in the first place. And Nicodemus, to your point, I know that there's a lot of crazy stuff going on, and it seems like the Christian voice is getting smaller, especially in the West. But I don't think any of the things that are happening can overcome God's will, of course. And I think, like Thaddeus is saying, the switch of everyone from atheism to some kind of spirituality actually makes it more favorable for the Christian voice because we're able to talk to them about spiritual things. And it's actually easier for them to understand than for an atheist who would just outright deny all that stuff. So even though I'd rather people be Christian, I see a change to some form of spirituality as a positive step in that direction. I say have hope. That's why I have the sign back here. People need to have hope.
Yeah, good stuff. That's great to hear. Good stuff. That's inspiring. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
So we will wrap up shortly, but I have two questions from Marlene that are directly on topic that I definitely want to cover here. Did Gardner go from practice to practice, system to system, because he found fault or weakness in them, or because he believed that he was stacking powers?
Good question. I think he was focused on stacking powers. It seemed like he was just interested in anything involved in occultism and pulling all of it together. Like I said, when he came over to America to visit with family in Memphis for a while, but he specifically wanted to go down to Louisiana and New Orleans to learn voodoo. So I wouldn't think that he would come over there because he thought that all the things in England weren't getting him what he wanted or weren't good enough. But since he followed what Margaret Murray was saying, and she started out by selectively picking things, I don't think that might have even been a problem for Gerald Gardner, because he could have picked out things, and he probably did pick out things from various religions that worked for him and didn't even bother with the things that didn't work. His Book of Shadows was a book of rituals that worked for him. So he was just trying to go around and find all the things that worked. I don't necessarily think he was being driven away from certain religions, but that he was being driven to aspects of other religions.
Excellent. And one more question. What is the difference between Gardner's view or the God within versus the New Age view?
Well, the Wiccan origin has the god Janus as the single god. And like I said, it's esoteric, so people change. Someone can say that they're Wiccan and maybe be a polytheist or something. Maybe I shouldn't have said the God within. There's some kind of spirituality, some kind of divinity maybe within that people are trying to reach toward. I'd have to go more in depth with the Book of Shadows to really answer that better. But I don't think Gardner believed himself to be God. I think he was trying to reach some higher divinity through his practices, but he wasn't trying to unlock the God within, like you'd say with like the law of attraction stuff that is permeating a lot of churches nowadays.
Yeah, I would say in the New Age, it although there are spiritual guides and whatnot that are semi-divine, that it's really about the self, right? It's really about how you can use these hidden laws, how you to better yourself, better your own life,
Right.
better your connection with the spiritual, whatever the case may be. It's not really about a deity per se. The guide, the spiritual guide, is just someone who came before and is now in an elevated position. So they're kind of semi-divine, but they're not what we would think of as a deity. So the New Age is more like kind of wishy-washy like that, where it's like, oh, just be happy and love everyone and follow the good teachers that came before. And Jesus is just one of many good teachers that came before. Whereas if I'm understanding correctly, Gardner's view is more like, no, there is a definite spiritual power. Like there is a actual deity or deities out there, and we want to tap into that power that they possess.
Right. Yeah. Also, I just thought of it. There's a resource that I really like. There's a woman named Marcia Montenegro. She calls herself the ex-astrologer. She was really big into all the astrology, law of attraction, new agey kind of stuff. And she's a Christian now, but she speaks out against all that kind of stuff. So if you want to learn a lot about new age beliefs and how to combat them, she's a great resource. She's the ex-astrologer. I think that's her website. I can't remember, but Marcia Montenegro. That's her name.
So just a quick comment here. A Muslim in the chat spams some stupid question that they ask 100 times a day, and they says, "Answer me, or you'll have no answer." So Zulfikar, if you want to have a conversation with me about that topic or any topic you want, you can email me, Thaddeus@reasonanswers.com, and I will be glad to set up a time to discuss with you. This stream has a specific subject, which is Wicca, which is why that's what we're discussing and not answering your questions. But I definitely do have answers to your questions.
I'm glad you showed that, because I didn't realize that I actually had no answer until he said it. I'm glad that he knows my own mind better than I do. It's really helpful to have a omnipotent person in the chat. Or omniscient. That's the right word. Omniscient person.
So one more isn't exactly a question, but I want to phrase it as a question. So Rockstar pointed to a video showing a Catholic exorcism. And the exorcism ritual, it does have like specific words that are supposed to be said. They're supposed to be said in Latin. And in a sense, it does kind of seem like a magic spell. So what would you comment about that?
Well, I do see the parallel there. It seems like some kind of ritual. But as we've been saying with the other things, the discernment matters. The people that are doing that ritual, speaking in Latin and exorcising someone, are doing so to hopefully to remove a demon from a person, not to gain some kind of wisdom or spirituality like Gardner was doing. So while the practice might be similar, the intention is wildly different. Pagans will meet and go and do their rituals and try and commune with whatever deity they want. But Christians also go to a church and try to commune with God in a way. But the context and the intent of those are entirely different. Also, on the subject of miracles and exorcisms and things like that, I know there's some kind of way that I can't think of it right now. A board of people, that's what I'm thinking of. A board of people that try and figure out if a miracle is actually real or if it was faked. There's a guy named Craig Keener. It's Craig. Yeah, Craig Keener. He's got a great book on miracles. It's a gigantic tome. It's like 2,000 pages. You don't have to read the whole thing. But he talks about a board of people. Some are Catholic priests. Some, I think, are Protestants. And actually, some are even atheists. But all together, they want to determine whether a miracle is real or not. And most of them are not. But they had some that they determined were actually real. So if you want some information on that, I suggest you look up I don't know what you would call it, but the Catholic board that determines if miracles are real. Really interesting stuff.
Yeah, I would echo those thoughts there that, or actually, I'll have to go better and just quote Jesus, that people are accusing him of casting out demons in Satan's name. And he's like, how can that be possible?
A house divided against
Satan
itself
can't
will not
cast out
stand.
Satan,
Yeah.
right? So, whether you think so, I guess there's basically two possibilities, right? Either the exorcism isn't real and it's psychological, right? That the person thought they were possessed and they were never possessed in the first place, and then practicing the ritual breaks that psychology and allows them to recover from it. or it works, in which case it's from God. But either way, I don't see a problem with it. And to be clear, I don't think that there are magic words that cast out demons, other than, of course, invoking Jesus, because, and I say that because he tells us to do as much.
Right.
But when we get hung up on, magic words, well, then we would be condemning Jesus, right? Because he said, when you pray this way, and then he gave us
Yeah.
the Our Father. So it's not that using the same words is what brings condemnation against you. It's you thinking that you have power by those words. Jesus
Bingo.
does condemn the way the pagans pray, where they use many words, where they think they're practicing some kind of magic spell by which they control the God, that they control whatever deity they're trying to control, but through their words, which is exactly what Wiccan's about, right? It's about controlling spiritual forces through
Right.
magic words. It's not that having a set formula to pray or having a set formula for how you interact with God is wrong in and of itself. What's wrong is thinking that you're in control, that you're gaining something by using those
Right.
words.
Can I, on that note, do a little more pushback on what we were saying before? I've got another anecdote about this kid. He was a PK, priest's son. The priest was actually a professor as well. He was a linguist. His son was 9 years old at the time. This was around the turn of the century when the first Harry Potter movie came out. Google was like brand new. Nobody really knew about Google quite yet. But this kid, was sitting with us and was talking about how he knew Harry Potter spells. And the movie again was still out in the movie theaters. We were like kind of looking at him like, yeah, whatever. And he's like, and he starts incanting these spells. And like, well, what are you doing? He's like, well, I got online and I learned the spells. And so basically, on his own accord, a 9-year-old kid got on Google something new and found out how to, in essence, learn a new language about spell casting.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, naturally, this stuff is fictitious, I hope, but still, it kind of begs the question of, you know, this appeal toward the occult and how it's popularized and how especially youth want to, for example, be like Spider-Man or Doctor Strange or the Scarlet Witch or whatever the case may be. Like if they're learning the wording and all that stuff, isn't there a danger of that opening the door to the real stuff, so to speak?
I think there is if you say that it's real. But again, the discernment is the thing that matters. If you tell that kid, hey, go play with these incantations, but remember, they're not real. It's just a fake story, and God is the sovereign ruler of the universe. That's what matters. Then I think the harm is going to be minimized. The same thing with Doctor Strange or WandaVision or any of those things. I think the more important thing is remembering the character of the characters. Like Harry Potter is condemned for for casting spells and whatever, but it's also a very powerful story about the power of love and joy and friendship and things like that. So yeah, you need to have discernment about these things. Take out discard the things that are bad, and remember the things that actually come from God, like love, joy, peace, patience, the fruits of the Spirit, things like that. They have a kernel of truth in them. You got to just figure out where the kernel of truth is and cast the rest of it away.
Exactly. So we'll wrap up here now. I'll get Julian's final thoughts here in a second, but I want to take a couple of these comments from the audience. From Yaya, I was 8 years in a relationship with a witch. First time I saw her toxic mother, I taught myself witches are real. And they are. They poison and brainwash you for their purpose very badly.
Mm-hmm.
And from Franz, I've seen the effect of magic. In some ways, it is probably real. I also believe that God is above all. People wouldn't practice something for thousands of years if it did nothing at all. And I think the key statement there is God is above all.
He's overcome the world already.
Thaddeus, if I may, I don't want to be shrewd, but could I ask your audience like a kind of semi-plug?
Yeah, go ahead.
Forgive me, I'm really bad about this. Thank you for tolerating me, and I apologize, Julian. That's an honor.
Oh no, it's fine. Go ahead.
So I've been working on this project. I did like a comic book series about, I think it was in 2018. I finished it. It's actually, ironically, and I know I'm going to sound like a hypocrite here, but it's kind of promoting the Native American Indian occultic practices, like the whole
Okay.
spirituality. It's, yeah. So the whole idea was to use this kind of medium to reach that audience, like the Comic Con group that is completely bought
Yep.
into it, and yeah,
Hmm.
and kind of give them reality checks, like gut checks, like, what, okay, this is melodrama and so on and so forth, but this is the predominant reality. Like, for example, Christians aren't running around setting Muslims on fire. That's a myth. Kind of like that. So, but I mean, I've written this story, so to speak. It's a whole comic book series. I've been struggling for years to find a comic book artist to keep coming close. I've got a fundraiser, which I don't want to do, especially in today's economy. But if anybody knows an artist that'd be interested in that kind of venture, please contact me. Let me know. You can do it through my channel or um, Thaddeus. Would you be willing to play secretary there? Or Thaddeus, thank you, sir. God
Yep,
bless you.
yep, yep. You can contact me if you're interested in that. I'll also put a link to Nicodemus's channel in the video description. He's been on here before, and I definitely encourage people to check out his channel and support him.
I hope it goes well. I'll be praying for you.
Thank you, sir. God bless you.
And then just a couple quick recommendations from the audience. Carol B says Doreen Virtue is a ex-New Age, now Christian YouTuber. She wrote books and sold her tarot cards. You can see how broken her heart is. Hoping that people would still have her wares, will get rid of them. And
Yep.
when she first converted, she actually offered to refund anyone's money. She later figured out that she couldn't actually do that financially, like because she doesn't have unlimited sources of funds. And of course, the author only gets a small portion of a book when they sell it.
Yeah.
Most of it goes to pay for the publication and distribution and whatnot. But she definitely wants people to get rid of those books and whatnot. And she came to what there's an important lesson here, right? This is an individual who was very high up in the New Age. She sold tons of books. I don't recall offhand how many subscribers she had, but I think it's in the hundreds of thousands. Like she was a major influencer in this area. And then someone talked to her about the truth of Christianity, and she saw she was wrong and left what she was doing. I'm not saying hope happened overnight, but the point is that we often look at people and much less famous people in our own lives, people we know, and say, they'll never accept the truth of Christianity. I won't even bother talking to them.
Mm-hmm.
And frankly, a large percentage of people who are not Christians have never really heard the truth of Christianity, have never really heard the beauty of the gospel message. They think of Christianity as a moral code that tells you what to do, that's in this situation, in that situation. And they say, I don't agree with Christianity's morality, therefore I'm not a Christian. And that's not why I'm a Christian. I'm sure there are plenty of people who call themselves Christians because they agree with its moral code and they were raised in the church and they haven't thought deeply about things. But I believe in Christianity because one, it's the truth, and two, the message, the real message of Christianity, not the morality, the real message of Christianity is life changing. Anything you want to add?
There's another woman named Angela Ucci, UCCI. She had a conversation with Michael Knowles from the Daily Wire on her past um, astrology and how she was really influential, and how then she had to do the same thing and become a Christian and realize all the stuff that she had done before. But she's no different than anyone else. Anyone else has, I think, when they become a Christian, they realize, oh my gosh, I've done so many terrible things. Sometimes I wonder, why me? Like, how could I possibly have become a Christian? How could God possibly love me enough to want to be with me after what I've done? But he does. It's fantastic. It's a wonderful mystery, but he does.
And then there was one other recommendation. from the audience here. Has anyone in the chat ever heard of Adam Bly? This is definitely his wheelhouse. I'm actually not familiar with him,
Me neither.
but I will check that out. And then a question from Love for Good. What is the title of the book by Lewis that is to help with Wiccans? I'm not sure what he's referring to, but do you have any book recommendations in general?
Yeah, let me do a quick search just to make sure I got it right. Hold on. Don't you just love the internet sometimes? It's called... Oh, come on. Where is it? So it was for the Strand magazine way back in the day, and it's called A Christmas Sermon for Pagans. I myself haven't read it yet, but A Christmas Sermon for Pagans, yeah.
Excellent.
There's actually,
I will put that in the description as well.
I think there's actually a text version of it online as well, so you could find that.
Yeah, I'll take a look for that, and I'll post a link to it after
Sweet.
this. So we are going to wrap up now. I need to grab a quick bite to eat before my Bible study at 4 p.m. When this stream ends, it'll redirect over to that. So if you're interested in being a part of that, go ahead and follow the link and then set a reminder, and I'll be back in 25 minutes or so. Any closing thoughts from you, Julian?
I want to say thank you for having me on. This is the first live stream I've done on YouTube. I've posted lots of videos, but it's the first live stream, and I think it went really well. Thank you for that. For anyone that's listening, if you're interested in the cultural aspect of critical race theory and things involved with that and how they relate to Christianity, I'm making a really in-depth hour-and-a-half long video that'll be coming out, hopefully not too much longer. So if you're interested in that, and then I will also be doing a video on the Christian roots of the ancient Chinese language and how it apparently connects to the flood and Noah and Genesis and all that stuff. It's fantastic. It's mind-blowing stuff. So there's just some really cool revelations that you see in that. If you're interested in that, then come check me out.
Yeah, and I would definitely encourage people to check out Julian's channel. I have checked out some, not nearly all. I don't want to be deceptive, but I've checked out some of his content, and what I have seen, I definitely enjoyed and found beneficial. So thank you all for joining us today. Like I already said, I'll have Bible study in 25 minutes. And tomorrow I'll be back at 1 p.m. Eastern Time with a testimony of a ex-Muslim who has converted to Christianity after 35 years of torture from Islam, as he puts it. So definitely, if you're interested in that, look for that. I haven't posted it yet, or I put the link, but I will post that tonight, and we'll see some of you, hopefully, tomorrow. Until then, have a great day. God bless.